On Christmas Eve, Elena Moreau Hale signed her own execution, not with a bullet, but with a pen. 4 years of loyalty, silence, and sacrifice dissolved in seconds as her husband, the most feared mafia boss on the East Coast, slid divorce papers across their marble table without explanation. No affair. No warning. Just cold, brutal finality. While Christmas lights twinkled outside their estate and powerful families gathered to celebrate, Elena's world shattered. But this wasn't rejection, it was something far more dangerous. Victor Hale had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He'd underestimated his wife. Before we begin, please hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let's dive in. The estate smelled of pine and cinnamon, a cruel mockery of warmth in a house that had never truly known it. Elena Moreau Hale moved through the grand foyer with practiced grace, her heels clicking against imported Italian marble as she supervised the final preparations. Crystal chandeliers caught the light of 1,000 candles, casting golden shadows across walls lined with priceless art, most of it acquired through means she'd learned not to question. Outside, snow fell in soft, picture-perfect drifts, blanketing the grounds in white silence. Inside, everything gleamed with cold perfection. Mrs. Hale, the caterers want to know about the seating arrangement for the Rousseau family. Maria, the head housekeeper, appeared at her elbow, tablet in hand. Elena didn't miss the slight hesitation before her title. 4 years of marriage, and the staff still sometimes forgot she'd earned the right to the name. She'd been Elena Moreau when she'd walked into this world, daughter of a respected but second-tier family, educated at the finest schools, trained from birth to be an asset in a world where women were currency and marriage was merger. Put them near the east windows, away from the Castellanos, Elena said smoothly. The last thing we need tonight is Antonio and Dominic comparing territorial disputes over dinner. Maria nodded, making notes. And Mr. Hale's return time? Any moment now. Elena kept her voice steady, though her stomach tightened. Victor had been gone for 3 days, not unusual in their world, where business often meant disappearing without explanation. But something about this absence felt different. His last text had been clinical. Be ready for guests. We need to talk. 4 words that had been eating at her for 72 hours. Make sure his study is ready, Elena added. Scotch, the Macallan 25, 2 glasses. And Maria? No interruptions once he arrives. The housekeeper's eyes flickered with something that might have been sympathy. After 4 years, the staff knew better than most what kind of marriage this was. Respect without warmth. Partnership without intimacy. A contract executed perfectly, except for the one clause that mattered. Love. Elena had stopped expecting that particular amendment years ago. She walked through the main hall, checking details with the efficiency of a general preparing for battle. The annual Christmas Eve gathering was more than tradition. It was theater, a display of power, unity, and control. Every family in the Northeastern Syndicate would be here tonight, watching, judging, calculating. Any crack in the facade would be exploited. Any weakness, destroyed. So there could be no weakness. The front doors opened, bringing a gust of winter air and the sound of car doors closing. Elena's pulse quickened. She smoothed her dress, deep emerald silk that Victor had once said matched her eyes, and positioned herself at the base of the grand staircase. The perfect picture of the Mafia wife. Beautiful, poised, waiting. Victor Hale entered like winter itself. 6'3" of controlled violence wrapped in a $10,000 suit, he moved with the economy of a man who'd killed with his bare hands and felt nothing. His dark hair was touched with silver at the temples now, though he was only 38. 4 years her senior, a lifetime ahead in scars, both visible and hidden. Their eyes met across the foyer. Elena searched his face for warmth, for recognition, for anything that acknowledged 4 years of standing beside him through blood and fire. She found nothing. Elena. His voice was frost. We need to talk, now. My study. Not my wife. Not even good evening. Just her name, delivered like a business associate's. She felt something crack inside her chest, hairline thin but deep, The guests arrive in 2 hours, she said carefully. Perhaps after now. He turned and walked toward his study without waiting to see if she followed. Of course she followed. That was what she did. What she'd always done. 4 years of following, supporting, standing silent while he made decisions that affected both their lives. The study door closed behind them with a sound like a coffin sealing. Victor moved to his desk, massive mahogany, worth more than most people's homes, and withdrew an envelope. Not just any envelope. Legal-sized, cream-colored, with the embossed logo of Morrison and Associates, the law firm that handled the syndicate's legitimate business. Elena's throat went dry. "Sit," Victor said, not looking at her. "I prefer to stand." His jaw tightened, the only sign that her defiance registered. "Suit yourself." He slid the envelope across the desk. It landed between them like a grenade with the pin already pulled. "What is this?" Elena heard herself ask, though part of her already knew. Part of her had known from the moment she'd seen his face in the foyer, empty of everything except cold resolve. "Divorce papers." Victor finally looked at her, and the absence of emotion in his eyes was worse than anger would have been. "My lawyers have drawn up the agreement. The settlement is more than generous. You'll want for nothing. The beach house in the Hamptons is yours, along with a monthly allowance that will maintain your current lifestyle indefinitely. All I need is your signature." The words hit like bullets. Clean, precise, fatal. Elena stared at him, waiting for the punchline, the explanation, the something that would make this make sense. They'd had dinner together a week ago. He'd asked about her charity work. She'd laughed at something he'd said about the Castellano family's ridiculous new security measures. There had been no warning, no fight, no slow dissolution of whatever fragile thing they'd built. Just nothing. Then this. Why? The word came out steadier than she felt. Years of training held her upright when everything inside wanted to collapse. "Does it matter?" "Yes." She stepped closer to the desk, her hands curling into fists at her sides. 4 years, Victor. 4 years of standing beside you, hosting your events, maintaining your house, never asking questions when you came home with blood on your cuffs. 4 years of being exactly what you needed me to be. So yes, why matters. Something flickered in his eyes, pain maybe, or regret, but it was gone so fast she might have imagined it. "This world is changing," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "The old alliances are fracturing. There are threats I can't contain, enemies I can't identify. And you—" He stopped, his throat working. "You're a liability I can no longer afford." The words were designed to hurt. They succeeded. "A liability," Elena repeated, her voice hollow. "That's what I am to you. Sign the papers, Elena. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." She looked at him, really looked, searching for the man she'd glimpsed in rare, unguarded moments over the years. The one who'd held her when her mother died, who'd listened when she'd talked about the architecture she'd once dreamed of studying before duty had redirected her path. The one who'd almost been someone she could love. He was gone, if he'd ever existed at all. Elena reached for the envelope with fingers that didn't shake. She wouldn't give him that, wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. Inside, the papers were exactly as described, comprehensive, generous. Cold as the man who'd ordered them drawn up. There was even a pen clipped to the first page, as if he'd anticipated no resistance. As if 4 years of marriage could be dissolved as easily as a bad business deal. Maybe it could. She'd been raised for this world, after all. Raised to understand that marriage was strategy, family was power, and love was a luxury that weakened more than it strengthened. Her parents had taught her well, duty above all else, sacrifice without complaint, grace under pressure. So she would be graceful now. Elena uncapped the pen. It was heavy, expensive, probably worth more than the wedding ring she still wore. Her hand hovered over the signature line, and for one wild moment she considered refusing, demanding answers, throwing his cold perfection back in his face and forcing him to feel something, anything, even if it was only anger. But that wasn't who she was. That wasn't what she'd been trained to be. So she signed. Her name looked strange on the paper, Elena Moreau, not Moreau Hale. 4 years, reduced to a hyphen she'd just erased. "There," she said, setting down the pen with exaggerated care. Your liability is removed." She turned to leave, her composure held together by sheer force of will and years of practice at hiding pain. "Elena." She stopped but didn't turn around. "The gathering tonight," Victor said, his voice strained. "I need you to play the perfect wife one last time." She looked back at him over her shoulder, and the expression on her face made him flinch. "Of course. Wouldn't want to embarrass you in front of the other families. I'll smile, charm, and pretend my world hasn't just ended. That's what I do best, isn't it? Pretend. It's not—" He stopped, running a hand through his hair in the first gesture of real emotion she'd seen from him. "It's complicated." "No, Victor. It's actually very simple. You wanted out. You got out. Now let me leave with what's left of my dignity." She walked out of the study and made it to the second-floor guest bathroom before the first sob broke free. 4 years of perfect control shattered against cold tile as Elena Moreau Hale, no, just Elena Moreau now, finally let herself break. 2 hours later, she was perfect again. The emerald dress had been replaced with something darker, more severe, midnight blue that made her look untouchable. Diamonds at her throat and ears, borrowed from the family vault, worth enough to buy a small country. Her hair swept up in an elegant twist, not a strand out of place. Makeup flawless, hiding the evidence of tears. She looked exactly like what she was, a mafia wife playing her final role. The guests had begun to arrive, black cars rolling up the circular drive in an endless procession of power and money. Elena stood in the receiving line beside Victor, her hand resting lightly on his arm as if nothing had changed, as if she hadn't signed away their marriage 3 hours ago. "Elena, darling, you look stunning as always." Sofia Castellano air-kissed both her cheeks, eyes sharp with curiosity. The woman missed nothing, a dangerous trait in this world. "Thank you, Sofia. Is Antonio with you?" Arguing with the valet about parking proximity, Sofia rolled her eyes with practiced exasperation. Men and their territorial displays. They laughed together, a perfect performance of female solidarity. Meanwhile, Elena felt Victor's tension through his sleeve, the barely perceptible tightening of muscles that suggested controlled violence. He hated the Castellanos, though the alliance held. For now. More guests flowed past, the Rousseaus with their 3 sons who all looked like variations of the same dangerous template. The Delacroix family, old money trying to maintain relevance in a changing world. The Kowalskis, enforcers from Boston expanding their territory south. Each one a piece on a chessboard that stretched from Maine to Virginia, each one playing a game where the stakes were measured in blood and bullets. Elena navigated it all with the grace she'd perfected over 4 years. She remembered names, asked about children, complimented the right people, and subtly undermined others. She was a masterclass in social warfare, and everyone knew it. "Your wife is a treasure, Victor," Marcus Rousseau said, his eyes lingering on Elena a beat too long. "You're a lucky man." "Indeed." Victor's response was clipped, territorial despite everything. His hand tightened on the small of Elena's back. Possession, not affection. She wanted to shove him away, wanted to announce to this entire room full of criminals and killers that he'd just divorced her, that his performance was as fake as hers, but that would be weakness, and weakness in this world was suicide. So she smiled and played her part. Dinner was elaborate, 8 courses designed to impress and intimidate. Elena sat at Victor's right hand, the position of honor, and made conversation with the guests on either side. The food was exquisite. She tasted nothing. Across the table, her father caught her eye. Robert Moreau, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, had been watching her all evening with an expression she couldn't quite read. He knew something was wrong. 28 years of being his daughter meant she couldn't hide from him completely. She gave him a tiny shake of her head. "Not now. Not here." He frowned but nodded, returning to his conversation with the Delacroix patriarch about shipping routes and territorial agreements. "A toast." Victor stood, his voice cutting through the dinner conversation. The room fell silent immediately. That was the kind of power he commanded. "To family, to loyalty, to the bonds that hold us together through changing times." Glasses rose. Elena raised hers with everyone else, the crystal catching candlelight and scattering it like shattered ice. To loyalty, she echoed, looking directly at her soon-to-be ex-husband. The irony was bitter on her tongue. Their eyes met across the toast. For a moment, just a moment, she saw something break through his controlled facade. Anguish, maybe. Or guilt. But then it was gone, buried under the same ice that had delivered her divorce papers. The dinner continued. Dessert was served, some elaborate chocolate creation that probably cost more than a car. Elena pushed it around her plate and wondered how much longer she had to endure this torture. "Mrs. Hale, might I steal you for a moment?" Her father appeared at her elbow, his smile warm but his eyes concerned. "I'd love to show you those antique books I was telling you about. In the library?" It was an obvious excuse, but she seized it gratefully. "Of course, Papa." Victor's jaw tightened, but he couldn't refuse without causing a scene. Robert Moreau might be second tier in the hierarchy, but he was still her father, still deserving of basic courtesy. They walked to the library in silence, her father's hand steady on her arm. Once the door closed behind them, his facade dropped. "What happened?" he demanded quietly. "And don't tell me nothing. I've known you since you were born, Elena. You're breaking apart and you're doing it in public. That's not like you." She opened her mouth to deflect, to lie, to protect Victor's precious reputation for one more night, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she found herself sinking into one of the leather wingback chairs, her perfect posture finally crumbling. "He divorced me," she whispered. 3 hours before the party. No warning, no explanation, just papers and a settlement and a demand that I sign. Her father's face went dangerously still. "He what?" "He said I'm a liability he can't afford." The words burned coming out. "That the world is changing, that there are threats he can't contain, that I need to be removed. That son of a—" Robert bit off the curse, his hands clenching into fists. "Elena, I will end him. I don't care about alliances or territory or consequences. He doesn't get to do this to my daughter." "Papa, no." She stood, grabbing his arm. "You can't. The fallout would destroy both our families. You know how this works." "I know that bastard just threw away the best thing that ever happened to him," her father growled. 4 years, Elena. 4 years of you building his home, managing his reputation, standing strong while he played king of the underworld. And this is how he repays you? It's done. She straightened her spine, forcing strength back into her voice. "The papers are signed. I'll move into the Hampton house next week, start over somewhere away from all this. It's fine." "It's not fine." Robert pulled her into his arms, and for a moment she let herself be small again, let herself be his little girl instead of a mafia wife whose marriage had just imploded. "Nothing about this is fine, and we both know it." They stood there for a long moment, the sounds of the party muffled through heavy doors. Outside this room, the performance continued. Inside, Elena let herself feel the full weight of what she'd lost. "There's something else," her father said finally, pulling back to look at her. "Something you need to know." "What?" "There have been attacks. 3 operations hit in the last month, all precise, all coordinated. Someone's making moves against the syndicate, and they're being careful about it. Quiet, strategic." Elena's mind sharpened despite her pain. "Who?" "That's the problem. We don't know, but whoever it is, they have inside information. They know our movements, our safe houses, our schedules." He paused, his expression grave. "Elena, there's a traitor in the families, and until we find them, everyone's a target." The pieces clicked together with horrifying clarity. The threats Victor had mentioned, the enemies he couldn't identify, the sudden urgency to divorce her, to cut her loose from his world. "He thinks divorcing me will keep me safe," she breathed. "He thinks removing my connection to him removes me as a target." Her father's eyes widened. "That arrogant fool! He really thinks that he can protect me by erasing me." The realization should have brought relief. It wasn't rejection, it was protection. Twisted, controlling, arrogant protection, but protection nonetheless. Instead, she felt her anger crystallize into something cold and hard. "He made a choice for me," Elena said slowly, without asking, without trusting me to handle the truth. "He decided I was too weak, too fragile, too much of a liability to stand beside him when things got dangerous. Elena, no. She cut him off, her voice sharp with fury. 4 years, and he still sees me as something to protect, not someone to partner with. 4 years, and I'm still just an asset to be moved around his chessboard as he sees fit. What are you going to do? She looked at her father, and the determination in her eyes made him step back. I'm going to remind Victor Hale exactly who he just divorced, she said. And then I'm going to find the traitor myself. If he won't trust me to stand beside him in this war, I'll fight it on my own terms. That's dangerous? Good. Elena straightened her dress, checked her reflection in the library mirror, and put her mask of perfection back in place. I'm done being safe. I'm done being protected, and I'm sure as hell done being underestimated. They returned to the party together, Elena's hand on her father's arm and steel in her spine. The performance continued, champagne and conversation, alliances and subtle threats disguised as pleasantries. She played her part flawlessly, smiling and charming and pretending her world hadn't just been torn apart. But inside, something had shifted. She was no longer Elena Moreau Hale, the perfect mafia wife. She was Elena Moreau, and she was done playing by rules that had never been written with her in mind. Across the room, Victor watched her with an expression she couldn't read. Good. Let him wonder. Let him regret. Let him realize too late that divorcing her hadn't removed her from danger. It had removed the one person who might have stood beside him through it. The party stretched on into the early morning hours. Guests began to depart, calling for cars and making promises to meet again soon. Threats and alliances wrapped in holiday cheer. Elena stood in the foyer, bidding farewell with the same grace she'd welcomed them with, the perfect hostess to the end. Magnificent party, as always, Sofia Castellano said, though her eyes were calculating. Though I must say, Elena, you seem different tonight. Stronger, somehow. Thank you, Sofia. Elena's smile was knife-sharp. Sometimes change is exactly what we need. When the last guest had gone and the staff had retreated to clean up, Elena found herself alone in the grand foyer. The Christmas tree still twinkled with 1,000 lights. Holly and pine still scented the air. Everything looked exactly as it had when the evening began. Everything except her. She climbed the stairs to the bedroom she'd shared with Victor for 4 years, though shared was generous. He rarely slept there, preferring his study or one of the guest rooms when work kept him late. She'd learned not to wait up, not to ask questions, not to expect more than the distant courtesy he offered. The divorce papers sat on his desk where she'd left them, her signature already drying into permanence. Elena picked them up, studying her own handwriting. 4 years, reduced to ink on paper. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. The beach house is ready. Keys with the property manager. Take whatever you need from the estate. The rest will be handled. Even in divorce, Victor was efficient. She should pack. Should start the process of extracting her life from this place. Should begin whatever came next. Instead, Elena walked to the window and looked out over the snow-covered grounds. Somewhere out there, a traitor was moving pieces on a board that could destroy everything the families had built. Somewhere out there, Victor was fighting a war he'd decided she was too weak to face. He was wrong. She'd been trained for this world since birth, had survived 4 years married to one of its most dangerous men, had learned to read the subtleties of power and navigate the currents of violence that ran beneath every polite conversation. Victor had made 2 mistakes tonight. First, he'd assumed divorcing her would remove her from the game. Second, he'd forgotten that she'd been playing it long before she'd ever met him. Elena Moreau pulled out her phone and made a call. "Papa," she said when her father answered, "I need you to tell me everything you know about these attacks. Every detail, every pattern, every suspicion you haven't shared." "Elena, I'm not asking for permission," she cut him off. "I'm asking for information. Are you going to give it to me, or do I need to find another source?" A long pause. Then, reluctantly, "Come to my office tomorrow, 10 a.m. I'll tell you what we know. Thank you." She hung up and turned back to the window, watching snow fall on a world that was about to learn a very important lesson. Elena Moreau might have signed those divorce papers, but she was far from finished. The morning after Christmas came too bright, too cold, too real. Elena woke in the guest bedroom. She'd refused to sleep in the master suite after Victor's announcement, to find the estate already humming with cleanup crews erasing all evidence of last night's performance. Through her window, she watched staff members pack away decorations with the same efficiency Victor had applied to their marriage. Everything had its place. Everything could be dismantled, boxed up, removed. She dressed in black, not mourning, but armor. A tailored suit that meant business, heels that made her tall enough to look most men in the eye, minimal jewelry. The diamonds from last night had been returned to the vault. She wore only her wedding ring now, and that would come off soon enough. Her phone showed 3 missed calls from Victor. She deleted them without listening. At 9:30, she descended the main staircase one last time as the lady of this house. Maria met her at the bottom, eyes red-rimmed. "Mrs. Hale, I'm so sorry." "Don't." Elena kept her voice gentle but firm. "And it's Miss Moreau now. The papers are signed." "He's in his study. He asked me to tell you." "I don't care what he asked." Elena adjusted her purse on her shoulder. "I'll be back this afternoon for my things. Please have the staff pack my personal items. Clothes, books, the photograph albums, everything else can stay." "The art collection, the jewelry?" "Mr. Hale said you should take whatever you want." "I don't want his guilt offerings." The words came out sharper than intended. Elena softened her tone. "I'm sorry, Maria. None of this is your fault. Just the personal items. That's all." She walked out the front door without looking back, half expecting Victor to appear and demand explanations. He didn't. Perhaps he'd already said everything he intended to say with those divorce papers. The drive to her father's office took 40 minutes through light morning traffic. Elena used the time to compartmentalize, to lock away the hurt and access the part of her brain that had been trained since childhood to analyze, strategize, survive. Victor thought divorcing her would remove her from danger. Instead, he just freed her to operate without his control. That was going to be his second biggest mistake. The first had been underestimating her in the first place. Robert Moreau's office occupied the top floor of a building in the financial district, legitimate businesses on the lower levels, syndicate operations above. Security was tight, but recognized her immediately. They always had. She was family, blood, someone who'd been navigating these halls since she was old enough to understand what her father really did for a living. Her father stood when she entered, his expression grave. "Elena." "Papa." She kissed his cheek, then settled into the chair across from his desk. "Tell me everything." He studied her for a long moment as if seeing someone new. Perhaps he was. Perhaps she was becoming someone new, someone who didn't wait for men to make decisions about her life. "The first attack happened 6 weeks ago," Robert began, pulling out a file. "A warehouse in Newark. One of the Delacroix family's operations. Small fire, looked accidental at first. Insurance investigated, found accelerant patterns. Arson, but professional. No witnesses, no evidence, nothing on security cameras." Elena leaned forward. "What did they lose?" "Product. About $2 million worth of merchandise that was supposed to move south by the end of the month. The Delacroix blamed it on rival gangs, beefed up security, moved on." "But it wasn't rivals." "No." Her father's jaw tightened. 2 weeks later, the Rousseau family lost a shipment. Interstate hijacking, again, very professional. The drivers were found alive, drugged, not killed. The merchandise vanished, another $2 million gone. "And the third?" "That one hit closer to home." Robert's eyes darkened. "One of our operations. A meeting between key players to discuss territory adjustments. Someone leaked the location, the time, the attendees. We walked into a federal raid, barely got out before arrests were made. Lost 3 good men who couldn't get clear in time." Elena's blood chilled. "When?" 4 days ago." 4 days. Victor had asked for divorce 3 days ago. The timeline made horrible, perfect sense. "He knew," she said quietly. "He knew someone was targeting the families, knew it was getting worse, knew it was coming from inside. That's why he cut me loose." "Probably." Her father didn't sugarcoat it. "Victor's many things, Elena, but he's not stupid. He saw the pattern, realized anyone close to leadership would be vulnerable, and decided you'd be safer outside his immediate circle. Without asking me, without trusting me to make my own choice. He's a controlling bastard who thinks he knows better than everyone else, Robert said bluntly. This isn't news. Despite everything, Elena felt her lips twitch. Her father had never particularly liked Victor, had argued against the marriage arrangement 4 years ago. He'd been overruled by the larger family interests. Alliances mattered more than his daughter's happiness. But he'd never pretended otherwise, never forced her to smile and agree that it was a love match. What do the other families think, she asked, about the attacks? Officially, they're treating each incident as separate, unrelated. Bad luck, poor security, isolated incidents. Robert's expression was grim. Unofficially, everyone's suspicious of everyone else. The Castellanos think it's the Rousseaus trying to consolidate power. The Rousseaus suspect the Delacroix are playing both sides. The Kowalskis are convinced it's an outside organization trying to move in on territory. What do you think? Her father was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. I think whoever's doing this is smart enough to know that division serves them better than unity. Every family looking sideways at each other, suspecting betrayal, pulling back from alliances, that's exactly what an enemy would want. Keep us fighting amongst ourselves while they dismantle us piece by piece. So we need to find them before the families tear each other apart. We. Robert raised an eyebrow. Elena, I appreciate that you want to help, but this is dangerous. These aren't society games or business negotiations. Someone out there is orchestrating attacks on the most powerful criminal organization on the East Coast. If they find out you're investigating, they already think I'm a target, Elena interrupted. Victor certainly does. Being divorced doesn't change that. If anything, it makes me more vulnerable because I don't have his protection anymore. She leaned forward, her voice sharp with determination. I spent 4 years learning this world, Papa. Learning how to read people, how to spot lies, how to navigate the politics. I know these families. I've sat at their dinner tables, listened to their wives gossip, watched their children grow. I have access to information you don't, relationships that might reveal things a direct approach would miss. You're talking about using your social connections to investigate the families. I'm talking about doing what I do best, being underestimated while I gather intelligence. Elena's smile was cold. Everyone thinks I'm just the discarded wife, heartbroken and helpless. Let them think that. Let them feel sorry for me. Let them lower their guards. I'll smile and accept their sympathy while I figure out which one of them is a traitor. Robert studied her with something that looked like pride mixed with concern. Your mother would be horrified. Mama wanted me to marry well and keep my mouth shut. I did both. Look where it got me. Elena's voice softened slightly. I'm not asking for permission, Papa. I'm asking for partnership. You have the operational knowledge. I have the social access. Together, we might actually find this bastard before more people get hurt. And if Victor finds out what you're doing, then he can file for divorce again. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. Oh, wait, he already did that. I'm a free agent now, remember? No longer his liability to manage. Her father sighed, rubbing his temples. You're as stubborn as your mother was. Fine. But we do this carefully. No unnecessary risks, no confronting suspects alone, and the moment things get dangerous, you step back. Agreed? Agreed. Elena felt something unlock in her chest. Purpose, maybe, or just the relief of having somewhere to direct her pain. So where do we start? Robert pulled out several more files, spreading them across his desk. Pattern analysis. The attacks seem random, but there's always a pattern if you look hard enough. Different families hit, but what connects them? What's the common thread? They spent the next 2 hours dissecting every detail. The Newark warehouse had been storing imported goods, luxury items, high-end electronics, nothing obviously criminal but valuable enough to fence. The Rousseau shipment had been pharmaceuticals, the legal kind, destined for distribution networks up and down the coast. The federal raid on the Moreau meeting had targeted a discussion about territorial boundaries and profit-sharing agreements. They're not going after product, Elena said slowly, pieces clicking together in her mind. Or at least, that's not the primary goal. They're disrupting operations, creating chaos, making families lose trust in their security. To what end? Consolidation. She stood pacing her father's office with quick, precise steps. If the families are fighting amongst themselves, if alliances are fracturing, If everyone's pulling back to protect their own interests, that creates a power vacuum, and vacuums get filled by whoever's orchestrating this. Exactly. Elena turned to face him. This isn't about revenge or territory disputes. Someone's playing a long game. Weaken the existing structure, let it collapse under its own paranoia, then step in when everyone's too busy fighting each other to mount a unified defense. Robert's expression was grim. That's a brilliant strategy. Also terrifying. And it means our traitor isn't just someone passing information, Elena continued, her mind racing. They're positioned to benefit from the chaos. They're planning to rise when everyone else falls. Which means they're probably someone already in a position of power. Someone trusted enough to have access to sensitive information, but ambitious enough to want more. Elena felt ice slide down her spine. Someone at last night's party. The implications hung between them, heavy and dangerous. Last night, she'd smiled and made conversation with potentially the very person trying to destroy everything the families had built. She'd laughed with Sofia Castellano, exchanged pleasantries with the Rousseau sons, discussed charity work with Margaret Delacroix. One of them might be a traitor, or their spouse, or their most trusted advisor. We need to narrow the suspect list, Robert said, pulling out another file. Who had access to information about all three attacks? Who would have known about the Newark warehouse, the Rousseau shipment route, and our meeting location? They compiled names, cross-referencing who had been present at various strategy sessions, who had access to operational details, who had the resources to hire professional arsonists and hijackers. The list was longer than Elena liked. 18 names, representing 7 different families. Too many, she muttered. We need more specific criteria. What about motive? Robert suggested. Who stands to gain most from destabilizing the current power structure? Elena considered the question. The Hales, Victor's family, were already at the top. They had no reason to upset the balance. The Moreas were comfortable in their second-tier position, influential but not exposed as primary targets. The Castellanos had been pushing for more territory, but Antonio was old school, favored traditional methods over elaborate schemes. The Rousseaus, she said slowly, Marcus has been vocal about modernizing operations, bringing in new blood, changing how territories are managed. His sons are all in their 20s, ambitious, tech-savvy, but they were hit second, Robert interrupted. Lost $2 million in merchandise. That's a significant blow. Unless it was misdirection, make themselves look like victims to avoid suspicion. Possible, her father made a note. Who else? Sofia Castellano. The words felt like betrayal even as Elena said them. Antonio's getting old. He's had health scares. Sofia's been managing more and more of their operations. She's brilliant, ruthless when she needs to be, and she's never been content with Antonio's conservative approach. She seemed fond of you last night. Sofia's fond of anyone useful to her. Elena's voice was flat. That's how she operates. Collect allies, cultivate loyalty, then use it when you need it. They added more names. Removed a few who had alibis or insufficient access. By noon, they'd narrowed the list to 6 primary suspects, each representing different families, each with means, motive, and opportunity. This is a start, Robert said. But we need evidence, not just speculation. We need... His phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression went carefully neutral. It's Victor. He wants to know if you're here. Tell him I left an hour ago. Elena, Papa, please. She kept her voice steady. I'm not ready to talk to him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Robert hesitated, then typed a response. Done. But he's not going to stop trying to reach you. Then he'll be disappointed. Elena gathered her purse. I should go. The movers are coming this afternoon to pack my things from the estate. I want to be there to supervise. Where are you staying? The Hampton House? Eventually. Tonight I'm at the Cosmopolitan downtown. Suite under my maiden name. She paused at the door. Papa, thank you for trusting me with this. You're my daughter. I've always trusted you. Robert's expression softened. Just be careful. Whoever we're dealing with has already demonstrated they're willing to destroy lives to get what they want. Elena thought about Victor's face when he'd handed her those divorce papers. About 4 years of marriage dissolved with no explanation, no discussion, no respect for her ability to handle the truth. "Too late," she said quietly. "My life's already been destroyed. Now I'm going to return the favor." The drive back to the estate felt different now. She wasn't returning as Victor's wife or even his ex-wife. She was returning as an investigator with a mission, and the first piece of that mission meant facing him one last time. The mover's truck was already in the circular drive when she arrived. Maria supervised the operation with military precision, directing workers to the guest bedroom where Elena's belongings had been staged. "Everything's packed except your personal papers," Maria reported. "Those are still in the sitting room. I thought you'd want to handle them yourself." "Thank you, Maria." Elena meant it. The housekeeper had been one of the few genuine presences in this cold house. "Where's Victor?" "His study." He asked. "I know what he asked." Elena squared her shoulders. "I'll handle it." She found him behind his desk, looking like he hadn't slept. Good. She hoped her signature on those papers haunted him. "Elena." He stood immediately. "We need to talk." "No, we don't." She kept her voice level, professional. "The movers are collecting my things. I'll be out of your house within the hour." "This isn't—" "Damn it, Elena, would you just listen?" Victor moved around the desk, frustration cracking his controlled facade. "The divorce wasn't about you. It was about keeping you safe." "I know." That stopped him. "You know?" "I know about the attacks, the traitor, the internal threat you're trying to contain." Elena watched his expression shift from shock to anger. "My father told me everything this morning. So yes, I understand why you made the decision you did. I just don't agree with it." "You should be thanking me, not—" "Thanking you?" Her voice went dangerously quiet. "You think I should be grateful that you decided I was too weak, too fragile, too much of a liability to trust with the truth? That you made a unilateral decision about my life without even having the respect to explain it to me first? It wasn't about respect. It was about protection. It was about control." Elena stepped closer, fury vibrating through every word. "You've controlled every aspect of our marriage for 4 years, Victor. Where we lived, who we socialized with, how I spent my time. I accepted it because that's what I was raised to do, be the perfect wife, support my husband, never question his decisions. But divorcing me? That wasn't protection. That was you deciding, once again, that you knew better than I did what I needed." "Someone is targeting the families," Victor said, his voice hard. "Someone with inside information, with resources, with a plan to tear down everything we've built. Anyone connected to me is a target. I couldn't—" He stopped, something raw crossing his face. "I couldn't protect you and fight this war at the same time." "So you chose the war." "I chose your life." The words came out like a confession torn from deep inside. "Elena, if something happened to you because of me, because of this world, I wouldn't survive that." For a moment, just a moment, she felt her resolve waver, saw the man beneath the Mafia boss, the one who'd held her when her mother died, who'd listened to her dreams about architecture and design, the one who might have loved her if he'd ever allowed himself to. Then she remembered the divorce papers, the cold dismissal, the assumption that she needed his protection more than his partnership. "You don't get to do that," she said quietly. "You don't get to divorce me and then claim it was for my own good. You made a choice, Victor. You chose to push me away instead of trusting me to stand beside you, so now you get to live with that choice." "I'm trying to keep you alive." "I don't want to just be alive. I want to matter. I want to be trusted. I want to be someone's partner, not their protected asset." Elena's voice broke slightly, then steadied. 4 years and you never once asked me what I wanted, what I needed. You just decided. Because I know this world. I know how brutal it is, how quickly people can be hurt, how— I know this world too. The words came out sharp, cutting. I was born into it, raised in it, trained for it just like you were. The only difference is that you were taught to rule it and I was taught to survive it. But Victor, I'm so damn tired of just surviving. They stood facing each other across the study, years of unspoken tension crackling in the air between them. Elena could see him struggling, could see the part of him that wanted to trust her warring with the part that couldn't surrender control. Control won. It always did with Victor. "You should go," he said finally, his voice empty. "The Hampton House is ready. You'll be safe there." "I'm not going to the Hampton House." His eyes sharpened. "Where?" "That's no longer your concern." Elena turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing, Victor. Those attacks you're trying to stop? I'm going to find the person responsible. Not because you asked me to, not because I need your protection, but because this is my world too. And unlike you, I trust myself to handle it." She walked out before he could respond, her heart pounding but her steps steady. Behind her she heard something crash, his fist against the desk maybe, or a glass thrown against the wall. She didn't look back. The movers had finished loading by the time she returned to the foyer. Her entire life in Victor's house, reduced to a dozen boxes and some garment bags. "Where should we deliver these, Miss Moreau?" the lead mover asked. She gave them the address of a storage facility downtown. "Everything except the personal papers. Those come with me." Maria appeared with a small box. "Your photographs, journals, and correspondence. Everything you asked for." Elena took the box, surprised by its weight. 4 years of memories, letters from her mother before she'd died, photographs of a life that had just ended. She should probably throw it all away. Start fresh. Leave the past behind. But she'd never been good at letting go. "Thank you, Maria, for everything." Elena pulled an envelope from her purse. "This is for you and the staff. A small thank you for making this place bearable." Maria's eyes widened at the amount. "Miss Moreau, this is too much." "It's not enough. Not for putting up with 4 years of Victor's moods and my pretending everything was fine." Elena managed to smile. "Take care of yourself, Maria, and if you ever need a recommendation, you call me directly." "Will you be all right?" The older woman's concern was genuine. "Out there on your own?" Elena thought about the suspect list in her purse, the investigation she was about to undertake, the danger that came with questioning the most powerful criminal families on the East Coast. She thought about Victor, alone in his study with his control and his protection and his cold, empty house. "I'll be better than all right," she said. "I'll be free." The suite at the Cosmopolitan was smaller than the estate, but infinitely more hers. Elena unpacked her personal papers, setting up a makeshift command center on the dining table. Photographs of last night's party spread across the surface. She'd had the estate photographer send her copies, claiming she wanted memories of the event. In reality, she wanted to study every face, every interaction, every moment that might reveal the traitor. Her phone buzzed, a text from her father. "Rousseau family just announced emergency security meeting. All top-tier families invited. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., neutral location. You interested?" Elena's pulse quickened. An emergency meeting meant something had happened, another attack maybe, or new information about the traitor. Either way, it was an opportunity to observe the suspects in a high-pressure situation. "How do I get an invitation?" "You don't, but your father does, and he's bringing his daughter as his +1. "Welcome to the investigation, Elena." She smiled, feeling purpose crystallize into something sharp and focused. Victor had thought divorcing her would remove her from the game. Instead, he'd just removed the one restriction that might have held her back. Tomorrow, she'd walk into a room full of the most dangerous people she knew and start asking questions that could get her killed. Tonight, she'd prepare. Elena spread the photographs wider, pulling out a notebook to document observations. Sofia Castellano, standing too close to Marcus Rousseau's youngest son. The Delacroix patriarch in deep conversation with someone she didn't recognize. Patterns of association, whispered conversations, glances that lasted too long. Somewhere in these images was the truth. Somewhere in the careful smiles and calculated pleasantries was the person destroying everything from the inside. And Elena Moreau was going to find them, not as Victor's wife, not as anyone's protected asset, but as herself. Finally, completely, dangerously herself. The photographs haunted her through the night. Every smile seemed calculated, every conversation potentially treasonous. By 3 a.m., Elena had filled 6 pages of observations and was no closer to identifying the traitor than when she'd started. She made coffee, strong, black, bitter, and returned to her makeshift command center. The city glittered below her suite, oblivious to the war being waged in its shadows. Somewhere out there, someone was orchestrating chaos. Someone who'd sat at her table, drunk her champagne, wished her happy holidays while planning the syndicate's destruction. Her phone lit up. Victor's name flashed across the screen for the 8th time that night. She watched it ring, then go to voicemail. Whatever he wanted to say, she wasn't ready to hear it, not when the sound of his voice still made something inside her chest crack open. Instead, she texted her father, "Can't sleep. Going through party photos. Need background on Rousseau's youngest son. Saw him with Sofia Castellano multiple times. Too friendly for casual acquaintance." The response came surprisingly fast for 4 in the morning. Julian Rousseau, 26, MIT educated, handles tech operations for the family. Brilliant, but reckless. Sofia's been mentoring him, supposedly grooming him to modernize Castellano operations. Antonio doesn't approve. You think they're working together? Elena studied the photograph again. Julian's hand on Sofia's lower back, her head tilted toward his in conversation that excluded everyone around them. Body language spoke volumes in their world. Casual touches meant nothing, but calculated intimacy meant everything. Maybe. Or maybe Sofia's using him to access Rousseau intel. Either way, worth investigating. See you at 2. She finally slept around dawn, dreamless and heavy. When her alarm screamed at noon, Elena felt like she'd been hit by a truck. The mirror confirmed it. Dark circles, pale skin, the evidence of a woman coming apart at the seams. Unacceptable. She spent an hour reconstructing her armor, makeup to hide the exhaustion, hairstyled in a severe twist that meant business, a charcoal suit with a pencil skirt, professional, powerful, deliberately unseductive. Pearl earrings that had been her mother's. When she looked in the mirror again, she saw someone who could walk into a room full of killers and hold her own. Perfect. Her father picked her up at 1:30 in an armored sedan with blackout windows. He took one look at her and frowned. You didn't sleep. I worked. Elena slid into the back seat, accepting the coffee he handed her. Tell me about the emergency meeting. What triggered it? Another attack last night, around midnight. One of Victor's warehouses in Queens, completely destroyed. Professional demolition, not arson. The whole building came down in minutes. Elena's coffee turned to ash in her mouth. Casualties? 2 guards, both critical condition. Victor's convinced it's a message. Whoever's doing this is escalating, getting bolder. Robert's expression was grim. He's calling for unity, proposing a joint task force to hunt the traitor. The other families are resistant because they don't trust each other. Exactly what our enemy wants. Her father handed her another file. This came in this morning, analysis of all 4 attacks. Look at the dates. Elena scanned the timeline. Newark warehouse 6 weeks ago. Rousseau hijacking 4 weeks ago. The federal raid on the Moreau meeting 4 days ago. Victor's warehouse last night. The intervals were shortening, the attacks intensifying. They're building to something, she said slowly. Each attack is bigger, bolder, more direct. This isn't just about destabilization anymore. No, this is about sending a message. Proving no one's untouchable, not even Victor Hale. The implications settled over Elena like ice water. Victor had divorced her to keep her safe, but the attacks were intensifying anyway. If anything, removing her from his immediate protection might have made her more vulnerable. Divorced wives of powerful men made excellent targets for leverage. Does he know I'll be at the meeting? She asked. Robert's silence was answer enough. Papa, he called me at 6 this morning, demanded to know where you were staying, whether you were safe. I told him you were fine and that he'd lost the right to ask. Her father's voice was hard. He didn't take it well. Too bad. Elena closed the file, her jaw set. He made his choice. I'm making mine. The meeting was held in a private dining room at an upscale restaurant in Midtown, neutral territory, public enough to discourage violence but private enough for candid discussion. Security lined the hallway, checking weapons and recording attendees. Elena recognized most of them, exchanged nods with the ones who'd seen her at enough events to know her face. Inside, the room hummed with tension. The major families had sent their key players, Antonio and Sofia Castellano, both looking tense. Marcus Rousseau with his 3 sons, including Julian, whose eyes flickered with interest when he saw Elena. The Delacroix patriarch, Gerard, looking older and more frail than she remembered. The Kowalski brothers from Boston, twins who finished each other's sentences and each other's kills. And Victor. He stood near the head of the table, commanding the room without trying. When Elena entered on her father's arm, his expression went carefully blank, but she saw the flash of something in his eyes. Anger, maybe. Or fear. She couldn't tell anymore, wasn't sure she cared. "Robert," Marcus Rousseau greeted her father warmly. "Good to see you." And Elena, his tone shifted, became sympathetic. "I was sorry to hear about your situation. Divorce is always difficult." The room went silent. Everyone knew, of course. In their world, secrets lasted about as long as snowflakes in summer. Elena felt eyes assessing her, calculating her new status in the hierarchy. No longer Victor's wife meant no longer under his protection. It made her vulnerable, exploitable, or so they thought. "Thank you, Marcus," she said smoothly, though I prefer to think of it as a new beginning rather than a difficulty. Sometimes we outgrow the roles we've been assigned. Sofia Castellano's eyes gleamed with approval. "Well said. Please, sit with me. I insist." Elena caught her father's slight nod and moved to join Sofia, very aware of Victor's stare following her across the room. Let him watch. Let him see what he'd given up. "You look remarkable for a woman whose marriage just imploded," Sofia murmured once Elena was seated. "Most would be hiding, crying, making scenes. Instead, you're here. Interesting." "I don't believe in hiding from reality," Elena replied. "And I still have family interests to protect, regardless of my marital status." "Smart girl." Sofia's smile was sharp. "Victor's a fool. You were the best thing that ever happened to him, and he threw you away to play hero. Men always think they're protecting us when really they're just protecting their own egos." Elena filed that comment away for later analysis. Was Sofia fishing for an ally, or was this genuine female solidarity in a male-dominated world? Either way, it was an opening. "Shall we begin?" Victor's voice cut through the murmuring conversations. He didn't look at Elena, kept his gaze fixed on the center of the table as if she didn't exist. The dismissal stung more than it should have. Marcus Rousseau stood, taking unofficial control. "We all know why we're here. 4 attacks in 6 weeks, each one more brazen than the last. Last night's destruction of the Hale warehouse was a direct assault on our most powerful family. If Victor isn't safe, none of us are." "Or maybe the attacks aren't random," Gerard Delacroix said, his voice raspy with age and cigarettes. "Maybe someone's targeting specific families. The Hales, the Rousseaus, the Moreaus, my people in Newark. That's not random. That's strategic." "Agreed." One of the Kowalski twins, Elena could never tell them apart, leaned forward. "Question is, who benefits from weakening these specific families?" "Everyone else in this room," Sofia said bluntly. "Let's not pretend we're all friends here. We're competitors who've agreed not to kill each other, at least not openly. If someone's breaking that agreement, we need to know who and why." The tension ratcheted up several degrees. Accusations hovered unspoken in the air, alliances creaking under the weight of suspicion. "This is exactly what they want," Victor said, his voice hard with frustration. "They want us fighting each other, suspecting each other, tearing apart the very alliances that keep us strong. We need unity, not division." "Easy for you to say," Julian Rousseau spoke up, drawing surprised looks from his family. "Your operation is the strongest, most protected. The rest of us don't have your resources, your security, your reach. Maybe these attacks are about leveling the playing field." "Are you suggesting I'm behind this?" Victor's voice went dangerously quiet. "I'm suggesting that the timing is convenient for someone who wants to consolidate power." Julian's voice was steady, fearless. Elena revised her assessment of him upward, reckless, yes, but also brave. Or stupid. Sometimes the line was thin. "My warehouse was destroyed last night," Victor said, each word precise and cutting. "2 of my men are fighting for their lives. How exactly is that convenient for me?" "Sacrifice pawns to protect the king?" Julian shrugged. Classic strategy. Victor moved so fast, Elena barely saw it. One moment he was standing at the head of the table, the next he had Julian by the throat, slamming him against the wall hard enough to rattle picture frames. "My men are not pawns," Victor snarled, his control finally cracking. "They're people with families, with lives, with loyalty that you clearly know nothing about." "Victor, enough!" Marcus was on his feet, his sons moving to defend their brother. The room erupted into chaos, chairs scraping, hands reaching for weapons that security had confiscated, voices raised in anger and alarm. "Stop!" Elena's voice cut through the noise, sharp and clear. She stood moving into the center of the storm with the kind of calm that could only come from years of navigating explosive situations. "All of you, stop!" To her surprise, they did. Even Victor released Julian, though his expression promised violence later. "This is exactly what the traitor wants," Elena continued, channeling every ounce of authority she'd learned from watching powerful men manipulate rooms for 4 years. "You're so busy defending your egos that you're missing the obvious question. How did the attacker know about Victor's warehouse? That location isn't public knowledge. It's not on any official records. Very few people knew it existed at all." The room went quiet, calculation replacing anger on every face. "She's right," Robert said, pride evident in his voice. "The warehouse was a black site. Need to know access only, which means either Victor has a leak in his organization, or someone at this table knew about it," Sophia finished, her eyes scanning the room with predatory interest. The temperature dropped 20 degrees. Everyone was suddenly very still, very aware that they were locked in a room with a potential traitor. "I propose we go around the table," Elena said, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "Each family representative states whether they had knowledge of the Queen's warehouse. Any lies will be investigated, any hesitation noted. We need transparency if we're going to survive this." "And who put you in charge?" Gerard Delacroix demanded. "No offense, dear, but you're not even part of the Hale family anymore. This is leadership business." "Which is exactly why I'm the only one who can be objective," Elena countered. "I have no family loyalty to Victor anymore, no stake in protecting him. But I also have no reason to want him destroyed. I'm neutral ground in a room full of competing interests." She turned to Victor, meeting his eyes directly for the first time since entering the room. "Unless you object." The challenge hung between them. Victor could shut her down, reassert his authority, put her back in her place as the irrelevant ex-wife. Or he could trust her, just this once, to be more than what he'd decided she was. "Do it," he said finally, his voice rough. "Elena's right. We need objectivity." She didn't let herself feel triumph, just nodded and turned to the table. "Marcus, let's start with you. Did you have knowledge of the Queen's warehouse location?" Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. We share some shipping routes with the Hales. I knew about the warehouse, though not its specific operations." "Your sons?" "No," Marcus said firmly. "I don't share operational details with them unless absolutely necessary." Elena saw Julian's jaw tighten, but he said nothing. She filed that away, tension between father and son, information being withheld, potential resentment. "Castellano family?" Antonio shook his head. "No knowledge. We operate primarily through different channels." "Sophia?" "I knew of it," Sophia admitted casually. "Antonio might not have known, but I make it my business to know where our competitors store their valuable assets. Simple due diligence." "Delacroix?" Gerard coughed, a wet, rattling sound. "I'm too old to keep track of every warehouse in the city. No knowledge." "Kowalski?" The twins exchanged a look, some silent communication passing between them. "We had suspicions," the one on the left said. "Tracked some shipments heading to Queens, never confirmed the exact location." "Moreau family?" Elena turned to her father. "No direct knowledge," Robert said, "though I could have found out if needed. We have resources." Elena processed the information, aware that everyone was watching her, calculating whether this young woman could actually pull off what she was attempting. The truth was, she had no authority here. No official position, no family backing now that she was divorced. No history of leadership. All she had was nerve and the desperate hope that intelligence could substitute for power. So we have 4 families who knew or could have known about the warehouse. she said slowly, which doesn't narrow things down much. But here's what I find interesting. The attack happened last night, less than 24 hours after the Christmas Eve party where most of you were present at the Hale estate. Same estate where security details were logged, where cars were tracked, where conversations could have been overheard. You think someone used the party as reconnaissance? One of the Kowalski twins asked, interest sharpening his features. I think it's possible. I also think we need to look at who benefits most from these specific attacks. Elena pulled out her notes, the analysis she'd worked on through the night. The Newark warehouse stored Delacroix merchandise, luxury goods, high-value items. The Rousseau hijacking targeted pharmaceuticals. The Moreau raid interrupted territory negotiations. And Victor's warehouse... She paused, looking directly at him. What was in the Queen's warehouse, Victor? His expression was unreadable. That's classified. Not anymore, it's not, Marcus said sharply. If we're sharing information, you need to share too. Victor's jaw worked, fury and frustration warring across his features. Finally, he bit out, Communications hub, encrypted servers, surveillance equipment, intelligence archives going back 20 years. Everything we've collected on every family in this room and a dozen others. The implications detonated like a bomb. That wasn't just an attack. It was a strategic strike at the heart of the Hale family's power. Their intelligence network was legendary, the source of their ability to stay 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Without it, they were vulnerable in ways they'd never been before. How much did you lose? Sophia asked, her voice tight. All of it. The building came down too fast to extract anything. 20 years of intelligence, gone. Elena's mind raced, pieces clicking together. That's not random. That's not even about destabilization. That's about blinding you before something bigger happens. What do you mean? Her father asked. Think about it. If you wanted to move against the families, what would you need? You'd need them divided, suspicious of each other. The first 3 attacks accomplished that. But you'd also need to neutralize the biggest threat. The one family with enough resources and information to stop you. So you destroy their intelligence network, remove their ability to see the bigger picture. Elena turned to Victor. You've been blinded. Whoever did this is about to make their real move, and you won't see it coming. The room erupted into overlapping conversations, voices raised in alarm and argument. Elena caught her father's eye across the chaos. He looked impressed and terrified in equal measure. We need to pool resources, Victor said, his voice cutting through the noise. Share what intelligence we each have, coordinate security, present a unified front. If Elena's right, we're running out of time. And if one of us is the traitor, Gerard challenged, we'd be handing them everything they need to destroy us all. Then we're damned either way, Sophia said pragmatically. But at least unified, we have a chance. Divided, we're just targets waiting to be picked off one by one. The vote wasn't formal, but Elena watched the subtle shifts in body language, the nods of agreement, the reluctant acceptance that cooperation might be their only option. It wasn't trust. Their world didn't work on trust, but it was necessity, and sometimes that was stronger. I'll host, Victor said. My estate has the security for a joint operations center. We'll bring in all available intelligence, cross-reference what we know, try to identify patterns before the next attack. When do we start? Marcus asked. Tonight, 6 p.m. Bring your best analysts, your most trusted people, everything you have on the attacks. Victor's eyes found Elena's across the room. All of you. The meeting broke up slowly, families clustering in defensive formations as they filed out. Elena stayed in her seat, watching the room empty, very aware that Victor was doing the same. Eventually, it was just the two of them and the wreckage of their marriage hanging in the air between them. That was impressive, Victor said finally, his voice low. The way you took control. I've never seen you do that before. You never gave me the chance. Elena stood, gathering her things with deliberate care. You were too busy deciding what I could and couldn't handle. Elena, don't. She cut him off, not ready for whatever explanation or apology or justification he was about to offer. I'll be at your estate tonight. Not because you asked, but because this is bigger than us. People are dying, Victor. This war you're fighting, it affects all of us. whether you wanted to protect me from it or not. I know I hurt you. I know the divorce was the best thing that ever happened to me, Elena interrupted, and was surprised to find she meant it. For 4 years, I was your wife, your asset, your responsibility. Now I'm just myself. And you know what? I like who that is a lot more than who I was pretending to be. She walked past him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, close enough to smell his cologne and feel the heat of his presence, close enough to remember what it felt like to sleep next to him, to wake up alone, to love someone who only knew how to control. 6 p.m., she said without looking back. I'll bring the analysis I've been working on. Try not to divorce me again before then. The door closed behind her with a sound like finality. In the hallway, her father waited with the car and questions in his eyes. Well, Robert asked once they were safely inside. How do you feel? Elena thought about Victor's expression, about the shocked respect from the other families, about the way she'd taken control of a room full of killers and made them listen. Dangerous, she said finally, a smile playing at her lips. I feel dangerous, and I think I like it. Her father laughed, sharp and surprised. Your mother would be horrified. Good! Elena pulled out her phone, already making notes on the meeting, observations about body language and reactions, who'd seemed surprised by what information. Maybe it's time someone in this family stopped playing nice and started playing to win. The afternoon passed in a blur of preparation. Elena returned to her suite, spread out everything she had: photographs, timeline analysis, notes on suspicious interactions. She cross-referenced it with what had been revealed in the meeting, looking for connections, patterns, anything that might point to the traitor before another attack could happen. Her phone buzzed with the text from an unknown number. Impressive performance today. Didn't know Victor's little wife had such fire. Be careful playing with flames. They burn. J.R. Julian Rousseau. Elena stared at the message, trying to parse whether it was warning, threat, or flirtation. Maybe all three. She typed a response. Fire only burns what deserves to be destroyed. Thanks for the concern. His reply came almost immediately. Not concern. Respect. See you tonight. Try not to make too many enemies before then. She set the phone down, unease prickling along her spine. Julian was too interested, too friendly, too willing to make contact outside official channels. Was he genuinely impressed by her display at the meeting, or was he testing her, trying to determine how much of a threat she posed? At 5:30, Elena dressed for battle. Black pants, silk blouse, heels that could double as weapons, if necessary. Minimal jewelry except for her mother's pearls. Those had become armor, a reminder of strength disguised as softness. She looked at her reflection one last time, seeing someone who'd walked out of Victor's house as a discarded wife and was walking back in as something entirely different. She just wasn't quite sure what yet. The drive to the estate felt surreal. Less than 48 hours ago, she'd signed divorce papers in Victor's study. Now she was returning as an investigator, an analyst, someone with value beyond her marital status. The estate blazed with lights. Security doubled from the party 2 nights ago. Elena was waved through after a thorough check, her credentials verified multiple times. Inside, the house had been transformed. The dining room converted to a command center, computers and monitors set up where crystal and china had sparkled just days before. Representatives from each family had already arrived. Elena recognized the Rousseau analysts, sharp-eyed young men and women with tablets and encrypted devices. The Castellano contingent included Sofia and 2 men Elena didn't know, both radiating the kind of competence that came from years in intelligence work. Her father had brought 3 people from the Moreau network, including a woman named Sarah, who Elena knew handled digital forensics. And Victor stood at the center of it all, directing operations with the precision of a general marshaling troops for war. Their eyes met across the room. Neither smiled, but something passed between them. Acknowledgement, maybe, or the ghost of what they'd once almost been. Elena. Sofia appeared at her elbow, drawing her attention away from Victor. Come meet my team. I think you'll find our preliminary analysis fascinating. The evening dissolved into work, cross-referencing data, building timelines, identifying gaps in intelligence. Elena found herself in her element, her architectural training lending itself perfectly to pattern recognition and systematic analysis. She could see connections others missed, spatial relationships and data that revealed hidden structures. "Look at this," she told the group around 3 hours in, pulling up a map on one of the monitors. The Newark warehouse, the hijacking location, the meeting site, and Victor's Queens facility. They form a pattern. Not random at all. Each location is exactly 12 miles from a central point. "Where?" Victor was suddenly there, leaning over her shoulder to study the screen. His presence made her hyper-aware of every breath, every movement. Elena highlighted the center point on the map. Industrial area in Brooklyn, mostly abandoned warehouses and old factories. Why would someone use this as their operational center? "Because it's forgotten," Sarah, the Moreau forensics analyst, said slowly. "The city's been trying to redevelop that area for years, but nothing sticks. Lots of buildings sitting empty, minimal surveillance, easy to operate unnoticed." "We need eyes on this location," Marcus Rousseau said. "Reconnaissance, see what we find." "Already on it." One of Sophia's analysts was typing rapidly. Cross-referencing property records, utility usage, any activity in the past 6 months. He stopped, his expression shifting. "This can't be right." "What?" Multiple voices asked simultaneously. "According to public records, 3 properties in that area were purchased 8 months ago through a shell corporation. The corporation traces back to—" He looked up, his face pale. "To a holding company owned by the Moretti family." The room went deathly silent. The Moretti family had been one of the major players 15 years ago, before a brutal internal war had torn them apart. They'd supposedly disbanded, scattered to the winds, ceased to be a factor in syndicate politics. Supposedly. "That's impossible," Gerard Delacroix said flatly. "The Morettis are gone. We made sure of it." "Did you?" Elena heard herself ask. "Or did you just assume they were destroyed because they went quiet?" Victor's jaw was tight, his mind clearly racing through implications. "If the Morettis are back, if they've been planning this for years, then we've been played from the start," Sophia finished, her voice grim. "Every alliance, every agreement, every peaceful year we've had, they've been watching, waiting, building resources for a comeback." "We need to verify this before we jump to conclusions," Robert said, though his expression suggested he already believed it. "Sarah, can you dig deeper into those property records? Find out who's actually operating out of that location." "On it." Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard. "But if they've been planning this for years, they'll have buried the trail deep. This could take time we don't have." "Then we make time," Victor said. "And we prepare for the possibility that our enemy isn't some random opportunist. They're organized, funded, and they have 15 years of grievance fueling their revenge." Elena's mind flashed back to the Christmas party, to the faces she'd cataloged, the conversations she'd observed. Had she missed something? Some clue, some connection to a family she'd thought long dead? "The Morettis had allies," she said slowly, "other families who sympathized with them during the war. What happened to those alliances?" "Most dissolved when the Morettis fell," Marcus said. "Though some families were suspected of maintaining quiet contact, nothing provable, nothing actionable." "Which families?" Elena pressed. The silence that followed was answer enough. Everyone in this room had secrets, connections they didn't want examined too closely. In their world, loyalty was currency and betrayal was capital. Who you knew mattered as much as what you knew. "This is getting us nowhere," Victor said, frustration bleeding into his voice. "We need actionable intelligence, not speculation about ancient history." "Ancient history is repeating itself right now," Elena countered, surprising herself with her boldness. "If we don't understand what happened 15 years ago, we can't predict what's happening now." "She's right," Sophia said, earning a sharp look from Antonio. "The Moretti War didn't end. It just went underground. If they're back for a reason. We need to know what that reason is." The discussion continued, arguments and theories bouncing around the room as midnight came and went. Elena felt exhaustion pulling at her, but her mind refused to slow down. Somewhere in all this data, all these connections and patterns, was the truth. She just had to find it before someone else died. Around 2 a.m., most of the analysts had crashed on couches or gone home to sleep. Only the core leadership remained: Victor, Marcus, Sophia, her father, and Elena herself. They sat around what had been her dining table for 4 years, drinking coffee that had gone bitter and cold hours ago. "We're missing something," Elena said into the tired silence. "The attacks, the pattern, the Moretti connection, it's all there, but we're not seeing the complete picture." "What do you mean?" her father asked. "I mean, if the Morettis wanted revenge, why wait 15 years? Why not strike when the wounds were fresh, when the families were already fractured from the war?" Elena stood, pacing the length of the room. Unless they were waiting for something specific, some condition that had to be met before they could move. "Like what?" Marcus demanded. Elena stopped, turning to face them. "Like unity. Think about it. 15 years ago, the families were at each other's throats. Territory disputes, power struggles, constant violence. The Morettis fell, but the instability continued for years. Any attempt at a comeback would have been crushed by whichever family was strongest at that moment. But now we're unified," Sophia said slowly, understanding dawning. "The alliances are strong, territories are settled. We've had relative peace for almost 5 years. Which makes us a bigger target," Victor finished, his expression grim. "Individually, we're vulnerable. United, we're powerful enough that destroying us would require exactly what they're doing. Divide us from within, then strike when we're weak." The pieces locked into place with terrifying clarity. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about taking back everything the Morettis had lost by destroying the very thing that had kept them from returning, the Syndicate's hard-won stability. "We need to move on that Brooklyn location," Marcus said. "Tonight, before they realize we've found them." "Agreed," Victor said, already pulling out his phone. "I'll coordinate with—" The explosion lit up the night sky like a second sun. Windows rattled, alarms shrieked, and for one horrible moment, Elena thought the estate itself had been hit. Then she realized the blast had come from outside, from the direction of the main gate. Security channels erupted with chatter, shouting, gunfire, the sounds of battle joining the chaos. "We're under attack," Victor said unnecessarily, his voice deadly calm. "Everyone to the safe room, now." But Elena was already moving to the windows, looking out at flames consuming the guardhouse, and figures in tactical gear pouring through the breached perimeter. This wasn't reconnaissance, this wasn't a warning. This was war. And it had just arrived at their doorstep. Victor was already barking orders into his phone, his controlled facade cracking under the weight of immediate danger. Elena watched tactical training override everything else. He moved with lethal precision, positioning people, securing exits, transforming the command center into a fortified position in seconds. "Sophia, Marcus, get your people to the West Wing safe room," he commanded. "Robert, take Elena and—" "No." Elena's voice cut through his orders like a blade. "I'm not hiding while people die defending this house." "Elena, this isn't negotiable." "You're right. It's not." She turned to her father. "Papa, you taught me to shoot when I was 16. I'm not helpless, and I'm not running." Another explosion rocked the estate, closer this time. Glass shattered somewhere on the ground floor, followed by the staccato rhythm of automatic weapons fire. Victor's security team was engaging the attackers, but from the sound of it, they were badly outnumbered. "How many?" Marcus demanded, moving to the window despite the danger. 20, maybe more," one of Victor's security chiefs reported through the open channel. "Professional military tactics, coordinated assault on 3 points. They breached the perimeter in under 2 minutes. Sir, you need to evacuate now." "Evacuation routes?" Victor asked, his mind clearly racing through contingencies. "Compromised. They knew exactly where to hit. This was planned, choreographed. Someone gave them our security protocols." The implications hung in the air like poison. Someone had betrayed them, handed over the estate's defensive blueprint to the very people trying to destroy them. Elena's eyes swept the room, studying faces for signs of guilt, for the telltale flicker of knowledge that shouldn't be there. "The tunnel," Sophia said suddenly. "Antonio told me about it years ago, some Prohibition-era escape route from the wine cellar. Does it still exist?" Victor hesitated, then nodded curtly. "It exists. Leads to a garage 3 blocks away, but it's narrow, defensible from both ends. If they know about it—" "They don't know everything," Elena interrupted, her architectural training suddenly relevant in ways she'd never imagined. "I studied the estate plans when I first moved in, back when I thought I might redesign some of the interior spaces. There's a second passage, older than the wine cellar tunnel, runs from the library through the old servant quarters. That passage was sealed decades ago, Victor said, but doubt flickered in his eyes. Sealed, not destroyed. I saw the blueprints. It's still there, just hidden behind false walls. Elena moved to one of the computers, pulling up architectural databases with fingers that didn't shake despite the chaos erupting around them. Here, original 1920s plans versus current layout. See the discrepancy? Victor leaned over her shoulder, studying the overlay. His presence was magnetic, dangerous, achingly familiar. Focus, she told herself. People were dying. This wasn't the time to remember what his proximity used to mean. You're right, he admitted, something like wonder breaking through his tactical assessment. There's a passage we didn't even know we had. Old money, old secrets, Elena said. The families who built these estates were paranoid for good reason. They always had multiple exits. Gunfire intensified, growing closer. Through the windows, Elena could see muzzle flashes in the darkness, figures moving with military precision through the grounds. Victor's security team was falling back, outgunned and outmaneuvered. We need to move, Robert said urgently. Whatever decision we're making, we need to make it now. Victor looked at the monitor showing security camera feeds, his people pinned down, tactical teams advancing, the main house about to be overrun. Then he looked at the faces around him, the leadership of 5 major families, all trapped in one location because he'd called this meeting. If they died here, the entire syndicate would collapse. Library passage, he decided. Marcus, Sophia, get your people gathered. Robert, coordinate with Sarah and the analysts. Nothing gets left behind that they can use against us. Elena. He turned to her, and for just a moment, the Mafia boss disappeared and she saw something raw in his eyes. Show me where this passage is. Fast. They moved through the estate like ghosts, staying low, avoiding windows. The sounds of battle echoed through halls where Elena had once hosted charity galas and family dinners. Bullet holes scarred walls she'd chosen paint colors for. Blood-stained carpet she'd selected. Her home, not home, she corrected herself, never truly home, was being torn apart by violence she'd been divorced to avoid. The irony was bitter as gunpowder. The library was chaos, overturned furniture where analysts had been working, abandoned coffee cups still warm, computers left running with data scrolling across screens. Elena went straight to the east wall, running her hands along ornate wood paneling that had cost more than most people's annual salary. Here, she said, finding the seam hidden in carved ivy patterns. There's a pressure release. Let me. Victor's hands joined hers, larger, scarred from violence she'd never asked about. Together they found the mechanism, felt it give with a click that was barely audible over distant gunfire. The panel swung inward, revealing darkness that smelled of dust and time. Victor pulled out his phone, using the flashlight to illuminate stone steps descending into blackness. Ladies first? Elena asked with a gallows humor that surprised even her. Not a chance. Victor drew a gun she hadn't seen him carrying. Of course he was armed, had probably been armed through their entire marriage, and she'd just never noticed. I go first. You stay behind me. How romantic, just like our wedding. He shot her a look that might have been exasperation or might have been appreciation, hard to tell in the dim light with people trying to kill them. The others arrived in rushed clusters. Sophia with her 2 analysts, Marcus with his sons, including Julian, who looked simultaneously terrified and exhilarated, Robert with Sarah and the Moreau team. The Kowalski twins appeared last, their suits torn and one of them bleeding from a shoulder wound. They're in the house, one twin reported. 2 minutes, maybe less. Move, Victor ordered, and they descended into the passage that history had forgotten. The tunnel was exactly as the blueprints had shown. Narrow stone corridor barely wide enough for 2 people side by side, ceiling low enough that the taller men had to duck. Elena led the way with Victor, her phone light joining his to push back shadows that had lingered undisturbed for decades. Behind them, the sound of the panel closing was followed by shouting, discovery, the realization that their prey had escaped. Gunfire rang out, bullets ricocheting off stone but not penetrating. The passage had been built to withstand far worse than modern ammunition. How far? Marcus called from somewhere in the middle of their desperate parade. 300 yards according to the plans, Elena answered, trying to keep her voice steady. Exits in what used to be the carriage house, now converted to a maintenance building for the grounds crew. If they're smart, they'll have people covering all possible exits, Sophia said. Her voice was calm, analytical even in crisis. Elena wondered what it took to build that kind of control, whether she'd ever achieve it. They can't cover what they don't know exists, Victor replied. This passage wasn't on any of the security protocols I shared. It wasn't even on my records because I didn't know it was here. Thanks to Elena, Robert said, and Elena heard pride in his voice that made her throat tight. They moved in tense silence after that, focusing on speed over stealth. The passage twisted and turned, following the property line in ways that made architectural sense once Elena thought about it. Bootleggers had needed circuitous routes, multiple cutoffs, places to hide if raids came. The families who'd built these estates had been criminals first, aristocrats second. Some things never changed. The passage began to slope upward, and Elena's legs burned with the effort of the climb. Around her, she could hear labored breathing, whispered curses, the shuffle of expensive shoes on stone stairs never meant for evacuation routes. They were all soft, she realized. Years of peace, of prosperity, of assuming security meant safety. They'd forgotten what their grandparents knew, that in their world, you were never more than one betrayal away from death. Light ahead, Victor said quietly, and Elena saw it too, a faint gray rectangle that meant exit, escape, survival. They emerged into what had indeed been a maintenance building, though it looked like it hadn't been used in years. Dust coated everything, tools rusted on workbenches, windows so grimy they were nearly opaque. But there was a door, and beyond that door, freedom. Victor went first, gun drawn, checking angles like the soldier he'd never officially been. Then he gestured them forward, and one by one they spilled out into the cold night air. The estate blazed behind them like a funeral pyre. Flames consumed the east wing where the command center had been, black smoke billowing into a sky just beginning to hint at dawn. Emergency vehicles screamed in the distance, but they'd arrived too late. They always did when the families were involved. "Cars," Marcus said urgently. "We need transportation, now." "There," Julian pointed to a cluster of vehicles near what looked like a groundskeeper's cottage. Keys might be inside. They moved as a group, constantly scanning for threats. Elena felt exposed, vulnerable in ways she'd never experienced in her carefully controlled life. This was what Victor had tried to protect her from, she realized. This visceral terror of being hunted, of knowing that death could come from any shadow. She understood his impulse now, still hated him for making the choice without her, but understood it. They found keys exactly where Julian predicted, hanging on hooks just inside the cottage door. 3 vehicles, enough to transport everyone if they packed tight. Victor was already organizing, his tactical mind working through logistics, even as his home burned. "Marcus, take your people in the SUV. Sophia, the sedan. Robert, I'm staying with Elena," her father said firmly. "Wherever she goes, I go." Victor's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Fine. You're with me in the truck. Everyone else, scatter. Different routes, different safe houses. We regroup at the Brooklyn location in 6 hours. If you're not there, we assume you've been compromised." "That's the Moretti stronghold," Gerard Delacroix protested. He'd been silent through most of the escape, but now his voice shook with more than age. "You want us to walk into their territory?" "I want us to take the fight to them," Victor corrected. "They just destroyed my home, killed my people, proved they can reach us whenever they want. No more running, no more reacting. We attack." "That's suicide," one of the Kowalski twins said bluntly. "That's war," Victor replied. "And we're already in it, whether we like it or not. The only question is whether we die defending or die attacking. I choose attacking." Elena watched him in the flickering light of the burning estate, saw the transformation from the man who'd handed her divorce papers to the leader who'd just lost everything. This was who he really was, she realized, not the cold businessman who'd married her for alliance purposes, but the warrior who'd been forged in violence and knew nothing else. She'd never truly known him at all. 6 hours, Victor repeated. Brooklyn. Come armed, come ready, and come prepared for this to be a one-way trip. Any questions? Silence answered him. They were past questions, past doubts, past anything except survival and revenge. The families dispersed into the night, engines starting, tires crunching on gravel as they fled in different directions. Elena found herself in Victor's truck with her father in the back seat, and Victor driving like he was fleeing hell itself. Maybe he was. They drove in silence for 20 minutes, putting distance between themselves and the burning estate. Finally, on a dark stretch of highway heading toward the city, Victor spoke. "How did you know about that passage?" Elena stared out the window at landscape blurring past. "I told you, I studied the architectural plans when I first moved in." "Why?" "Because I was bored. Because I thought maybe if I understood the house, I'd understand the man who lived there." She laughed without humor. "Turns out, I was wrong about that." "Elena, don't." She cut him off, exhaustion and adrenaline making her raw. "Just don't, Victor. You don't get to divorce me and then act like we're partners now because circumstances forced us together. We're not partners. We're barely allies. The only reason I'm in this truck is because that passage saved all our lives and you happen to be part of the group. That's not fair." "Fair?" Elena turned to face him, fury finally breaking through her control. "You want to talk about fair? You handed me divorce papers on Christmas Eve without explanation, treated me like a liability you needed to dispose of, and then called a meeting that almost got me killed. So no, Victor, I don't think you get to lecture me about fair." "I was trying to protect you," he said, his hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. "By erasing me. By deciding what I could handle, what I deserved to know, what role I was allowed to play in my own life." Elena's voice shook with the weight of everything she'd been holding back. "I spent 4 years being your perfect wife, smiling, supporting, never questioning, never demanding more than you were willing to give. And you know what that got me? Divorce papers and a beach house. Congratulations, Victor. You successfully protected me from having a real marriage." "That's not—" He stopped, seemed to struggle with something internal. "I didn't know how to do both. Be who this world needs me to be and be a husband to you. The two things felt impossible to reconcile. So you chose the world." "I chose your safety. There's a difference." "No," Elena said quietly, "there really isn't. Because either way, I didn't matter enough for you to try." Robert cleared his throat from the back seat. "Perhaps we could focus on not dying in the next 6 hours and save the marriage counseling for later?" Despite everything, Elena felt a hysterical laugh bubble up. Her father was right. They were driving toward a confrontation with a vengeful crime family that had just demonstrated they could destroy any of them at will. Personal grievances seemed absurdly trivial compared to that. Except they weren't trivial to her. They were the foundation of everything that had cracked and broken over the past 3 days. "Fine," she said. "What's the plan for Brooklyn? We can't just walk into Moretti territory with 5 families worth of leadership and expect anything other than a massacre." "We use what they don't expect," Victor said, his tactical mind clearly already working through scenarios. "They think they're hunting us, that we're scared and scattered. We hit them fast, hard before they realize we've identified their base of operations. That's not a plan. That's a suicide wish with extra steps." "You have a better idea?" Elena considered the question, her mind shifting into the analytical mode that had served her well in the command center. "Actually, yes. They attacked the estate because they knew all the leadership would be there, which means they have someone feeding them real-time intelligence." "Obviously," Victor said impatiently. "So we feed them false intelligence. Make them think the attack worked better than it did, that we're more scattered and disorganized than we are. Then, while they're celebrating their victory and planning their next move, we hit them." Robert leaned forward. "How do we plant false intelligence when we don't know who the informant is?" "We don't need to know who they are," Elena said, pieces clicking together. "We just need to control what information is available. Everyone's phones are compromised. They've been tracking our communications, our locations, so we use that. We stage conversations, fake arguments about where to hide, make it look like the families are fracturing under pressure. While actually coordinating in person," Victor finished, and Elena heard grudging respect in his voice. "Lead them to expect us in one place while we hit them from another." "Exactly. They're good, but they're also arrogant. They just destroyed the Hale estate, killed or scattered dozens of our people. They'll expect us to be running scared, not regrouping for a counterattack." "This could work," her father said slowly. But it requires perfect coordination between all the families. One mistake, one person who doesn't get the message or breaks under pressure, and we tip our hand. Then we keep it simple, Elena said. Each family leader makes one call on their compromised phone, something that sounds panicked, desperate. Mentions a safe house location, different location for each family, all far from Brooklyn. Then we dump the phones, go dark, and regroup in person. Victor was quiet for a long moment, navigating traffic as the city began to wake around them. Finally, he nodded. It's risky. But everything's risky now. At least this way we control the narrative. He pulled the truck into a parking garage, killed the engine, and turned to face Elena fully. This plan of yours? It's good. Really good. Where did you learn to think like this? From you, she said simply. 4 years of watching you maneuver people, control situations, stay 3 steps ahead. You think I wasn't paying attention? Something shifted in his expression. Regret, maybe, or recognition of opportunity wasted. I underestimated you. Yes, Elena agreed. You did. They spent the next hour in that parking garage, coordinating via brief, careful calls to the other families. Each conversation was deliberately staged for whoever might be listening. Panic, confusion, arguments about next steps. Marcus Rousseau's voice shook convincingly as he told his sons to meet at a warehouse in Queens. Sofia Castellano snapped at Antonio about retreating to their Connecticut estate. The Kowalskis mentioned Boston, running home to familiar territory. And through it all, the real message was passed in coded language they'd all agreed on. Brooklyn, 6 hours, come armed. Then, one by one, they destroyed their phones, smashed them, stripped the SIM cards, scattered the pieces in dumpsters across 3 city blocks. Going dark in the modern age felt like severing a limb, but it was necessary. The Morettis had been tracking them through technology. Time to fight old school. They found a 24-hour diner that smelled of grease and desperation, claimed a back booth, and waited. Robert went to make contact with the other families in person, using runners and cutouts like they were living in the 1970s. Elena and Victor sat across from each other in uncomfortable silence, drinking coffee that tasted like motor oil and watching dawn break over a city that had no idea how close it was to war. I'm sorry, Victor said finally, his voice low enough that it barely carried across the table. For the divorce. For not trusting you. For all of it. Elena studied him, really studied him, seeing past the Mafia boss facade to the man underneath. Scarred, damaged, incapable of vulnerability except in these rare moments when his control cracked. I don't want your apology, she said. I want your truth. Why did you really divorce me, Victor? Not the protection excuse, the real reason. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, because I was falling in love with you and that scared me more than anything else in this world. The confession hung between them like a fragile, dangerous thing. You have a strange way of showing love, Elena said, her throat tight. I know, I'm not good at this, at being a person instead of a position. The divorce was supposed to keep you safe, but it was also supposed to keep me safe. From caring too much. From having something that could be used against me. He stopped, struggled. From being human enough to break. So instead you broke me. Yes. No excuses, no justifications. Just acknowledgement. I did. And I'll regret that for the rest of my life. However long or short that turns out to be. Elena wanted to rage at him, to throw his confession back in his face and tell him it was too late, too little, too wrapped in the same controlling mindset that had poisoned their marriage from the start. But she was exhausted, terrified, and running on nothing but adrenaline and bitter coffee. And underneath all that, despite everything, part of her still loved him too. If we survive this, she said carefully, if we somehow make it through the next 24 hours alive, we're going to have a very long conversation about how spectacularly terrible you are at emotional honesty. And if we don't survive? Elena reached across the table, took his hand, scarred, dangerous, trembling slightly with exhaustion or fear or both. Then at least we'll die having said what needed to be said. His fingers closed around hers, gripped tight enough to hurt. They sat like that as the city woke around them, two people who'd failed at marriage but might still succeed at partnership, holding on to each other as if touch alone could keep them tethered to life. Robert returned just before noon with confirmation. All families accounted for, all converging on Brooklyn as planned. The Morettis had taken the bait, their forces dispersing to cover the fake safe houses. Intelligence suggested their Brooklyn stronghold was operating with minimal security, confident that their enemies were too scattered to mount a coordinated response. Perfect. They armed themselves from a cache Robert had maintained for exactly this kind of emergency. Elena accepted a handgun with the easy familiarity of her father's daughter. He'd insisted she learn young, despite her mother's protests. Turned out paranoia was a survival trait in their world. The drive to Brooklyn felt both endless and too short. Elena watched the city pass, wondering if she'd see it again, if any of them would. This plan required perfect execution, required that everyone play their part without hesitation. One mistake, and they'd all die. But sitting idle while the Morettis picked them off one by one wasn't an option either. The industrial area was exactly as depressing as the property records suggested. Abandoned warehouses, rusted fences, streets cracked and overgrown with weeds. Progress had forgotten this place, and the Morettis had made it their own. The families gathered in the shadow of a condemned factory 3 blocks from the target location. 20 people, give or take, representing the leadership of 5 major crime families. Armed, desperate, united for maybe the first time in their violent history. Victor took point, laying out the assault strategy with military precision. They'd hit from 3 sides simultaneously. Rousseau team from the north, Castellanos from the west, combined Hell-Moreau-Kowalski forces from the south. Fast, brutal, overwhelming force before the Morettis could mount a defense. "Remember," Victor said, his voice carrying that particular quality of command that made people listen. "We need at least one of them alive. Someone high enough up to give us answers about who else is involved, what their endgame is. Kill everyone else, but someone talks before they die." Elena caught Sophia's eye across the group and saw her own thoughts reflected there. They'd become the very thing they pretended not to be. Criminals, killers, people who spoke casually about murder and interrogation. But that was their world, had always been their world. She'd just been sheltered from the worst of it. Not anymore. They moved into position with the careful coordination of people who'd spent their lives in violence. Elena stayed close to her father, her gun held with steady hands that surprised her. She'd shot at targets, at paper silhouettes in climate-controlled ranges. Never at people. That was about to change. The warehouse came into view, 3 stories of brick and broken windows, cars parked outside suggesting occupation. No visible guards, which was either carelessness or a trap. Elena's money was on trap. Victor's hand signal cut through her speculation. 30 seconds. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. This was insane. They were about to start a war based on property records and pattern analysis, betting their lives that they'd identified the right target. 20 seconds. She thought about her mother, who died never knowing what her husband really did for a living. Thought about the divorce papers still sitting on Victor's desk, legally binding despite feeling meaningless now. 10 seconds. Victor looked at her across the distance, and Elena saw fear in his eyes for the first time since she'd known him. Not fear of death, fear of losing her. She nodded once. "I'm ready." 5 seconds. The world condensed to this moment, the weight of her gun, the sound of her breathing, the knowledge that in 5 seconds everything would change. 0. They hit the warehouse like a hurricane, 3 teams crashing through different entry points simultaneously. Elena heard shouting, gunfire, the organized chaos of combat. She followed her father through the southern entrance, weapon up, every sense hyper-alert. The ground floor was empty, not abandoned. There were signs of recent occupation, coffee still warm in cups, computers running, but empty of people. Wrong. This was wrong. "It's a trap!" Marcus's voice came through the radio. "Pull back, it's—" The explosion cut him off, somewhere on the north side where the Rousseaus had entered. Then another, west side. The building shook, and Elena realized with horrible clarity that they'd walked straight into exactly what the Morettis wanted. "Out!" Victor was screaming. "Everyone out now!" But before they could move, figures appeared from hidden positions. behind false walls, dropping from ceiling hatches, emerging from shadows that had seemed empty. Tactical gear, automatic weapons, professional military precision. The Morettis had been waiting, and the real battle had just begun. Elena fired without thinking, training overriding terror. Someone went down, then another. Around her, the warehouse became a killing floor. Muzzle flashes in the darkness, screams, the smell of blood and gunpowder. She saw Julian Rousseau take a bullet to the chest, saw Sofia Castellano drag him toward cover, saw one of the Kowalski twins fall and not get up, saw her father fire steadily, calmly, like this was just another day, saw Victor fighting his way toward her, determination written in every movement. Then pain exploded in her side, white-hot and devastating. Elena looked down, saw blood spreading across her shirt, and thought with distant surprise that she'd been shot. The world tilted, her legs gave out, and the last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Victor's face, twisted with anguish and rage, as he caught her before she hit the ground. Pain dragged Elena back to consciousness in waves. She surfaced to the sound of gunfire, her father's voice shouting orders, Victor's hands pressed against her side, trying to stop the bleeding. The world swam in and out of focus, reality fragmenting into disconnected moments. "Stay with me," Victor was saying, his voice raw with something she'd never heard before. Desperation. "Elena, stay with me. You don't get to die. Not now, not like this." She tried to speak, managed only a wheeze that tasted like copper. Blood, she realized distantly. She was bleeding badly, maybe dying, and all she could think was how absurd it was that she'd survived divorce only to die in a warehouse firefight 3 days later. "Robert!" Victor screamed. "I need cover now!" Her father appeared above her, his face streaked with something dark. Blood, or soot, or both. His hands joined Victor's, applying pressure that made Elena's world go white with agony. "The bullet went through," Robert said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "She's losing blood fast, but if we can get her out of here—" "Working on that!" Victor's tone shifted, became the cold, tactical voice she recognized from 4 years of marriage. He was compartmentalizing, shutting down everything except what needed to be done. "Sofia, status!" "North exit is clear." Sofia's voice came from somewhere to the left. "We took out their blocking force. Marcus is down but stable. Julian's critical. We need to move now before reinforcements arrive." "How many did we lose?" A pause heavy with grief. 4 confirmed dead. 3 more critical. This was a massacre, Victor. Elena felt Victor's hands tighten on her wound, felt him absorb that information and keep functioning anyway. That was who he was, she thought hazily. A man who could hold his dying ex-wife and calculate acceptable losses in the same breath. "Everyone mobile. Fall back to the south exit," he commanded. "Carry the wounded. Leave nothing behind. Move!" The world lurched as Victor lifted her. Elena bit back a scream, tasted blood. Around her, the warehouse was a war zone, bodies on the floor, some in tactical gear, some in expensive suits. The families had hit the Morettis hard, but the Morettis had hit back harder. "I've got you," Victor murmured, his breath hot against her ear. "Just hold on. Please, Elena. Just hold on." She wanted to tell him she was trying. The consciousness kept slipping away like water through her fingers, that she could feel her life leaking out with every heartbeat. But words wouldn't come, only darkness pulling at the edges of her vision. They made it outside into cold air that shocked her system. Dawn had fully broken, painting the industrial wasteland in shades of gray and gold. Beautiful, Elena thought. Strange to notice beauty while dying. "Get her in the truck," Robert ordered. "I'll drive. Victor, keep pressure on that wound." Elena found herself in the back seat, Victor's lap serving as a pillow, his hands never leaving her side. Through the window, she saw the other families piling into vehicles, some limping, some being carried. Sofia appeared with Julian draped over her shoulder, blood soaking through his shirt. The Kowalski twins. No, just one twin now, carrying his brother's body with gentle reverence. 4 dead. The number circled in Elena's fading consciousness. 4 people dead because of a plan she'd helped devise, because they'd walked into a trap trying to end this war. "Where am I going?" Robert demanded, engine roaring to life. "St. Mary's Hospital," Victor said. "It's..." No hospitals, Sophia cut in through the radio. The Morettis will have people watching every emergency room in the city. We take her there, we might as well put a bullet in her ourselves. She's bleeding out. Victor's control finally cracked. She needs a hospital, she needs surgery, she needs a doctor who won't report a gunshot wound to the police, Robert interrupted. I know someone, 20 minutes. Can you keep her alive that long? Victor looked down at Elena, and she saw her own death reflected in his eyes. But he said, yes, drive. The truck lurched forward, and Elena's world dissolved into pain and fragments. She was vaguely aware of Victor talking to her, his voice hoarse and constant, telling her things he should have said 4 years ago, about how he'd watched her at their wedding and thought she was the most terrifying, beautiful thing he'd ever seen, about how he'd kept his distance because loving her felt like giving someone a loaded gun and trusting them not to pull the trigger, about how the divorce had been the biggest mistake of his life, made worse because he thought he was being noble. I was a coward, he said, and Elena felt wetness hit her face that wasn't blood. Victor was crying. Victor Hale, who she'd never seen show weakness, was crying over her. I was so afraid of what you made me feel that I destroyed the best thing I'd ever had. And now you're dying, and I never got to tell you. Elena, I love you. I love you, and I'm so sorry, and please don't leave me. Please. She wanted to answer, wanted to tell him that she loved him too despite everything, that 4 years of distance hadn't killed what she'd felt from the beginning. But darkness was winning, pulling her down into silence. The last thing she heard before consciousness left completely was her father's voice, tight with emotion. We're here. Get her inside now. When Elena woke again, the pain had transformed from sharp agony to dull, throbbing ache. She was in a bed, not a hospital bed, something softer, more personal. The room around her was unfamiliar, decorated in warm earth tones that suggested someone's home rather than a medical facility. You're awake. Her father's voice came from a chair beside the bed. He looked like he'd aged 10 years, his face lined with exhaustion and stress. Thank merciful. He stopped, swallowed hard. You scared the hell out of me, Elena. Where? Her voice was a rasp, throat raw from screaming she didn't remember. Safe house. Dr. Chen's private residence. He removed the bullet, repaired the damage. You're going to be fine, but it was close. Very close. Robert took her hand, gripped it like he was afraid she'd disappear. You lost a lot of blood. Victor gave you a transfusion. Turned out you're the same blood type. The universe has a sick sense of humor. Elena processed that information slowly, Victor's blood flowing through her veins, keeping her alive. The intimacy of it felt strange, profound in ways she couldn't articulate. How long? 18 hours. It's late afternoon, day after the warehouse. Her father's expression darkened. We lost 4 people in the initial assault. Julian Rousseau died in surgery, his family's devastated. The Kowalski twin, his name was Daniel, died protecting his brother. 2 of Sophia's analysts didn't make it out. Grief hit Elena like a physical blow. Julian had been young, brilliant, his whole life ahead of him, and the others, people with families, with futures, with lives that had been snuffed out because of this war. And the Morettis? She asked, needing to know if their deaths had meant anything. We captured 3 of them alive before we retreated. One of them was Dominic Moretti, nephew of the old family head. Victor's been interrogating him for the past 6 hours. Interrogating? Elena knew what that word meant in their world. Where? Elena, you need to rest. You just had major surgery. Where, Papa? Robert sighed, recognizing the steel in her voice. Basement. But Victor's not going to let you anywhere near. Elena was already trying to sit up, ignoring the way her vision swam and pain lanced through her side. Her father tried to push her back down, but she caught his wrist. 4 people died because of my plan, she said quietly. I need to see this through. I need to know why. It wasn't your plan that killed them. It was the Morettis' ambush, which we walked into because I convinced everyone we could outsmart them. Those deaths are on me, Papa. The least I can do is face the truth. She could see the war in his expression, the desire to protect her warring with respect for her agency. Finally, respect won. He helped her into a robe, supported her weight as she stood on legs that felt like water. Slow, he cautioned. Dr. Chen will have my head if you tear your stitches. They made their way downstairs, a journey that should have taken 30 seconds but stretched into agonizing minutes. Every step pulled at her wound, but Elena gritted her teeth and kept moving. She'd survived being shot. She could survive a staircase. The basement door was guarded by two of Victor's most trusted security. They looked at Elena with something like awe, as if she'd risen from the dead. Maybe she had. Mr. Hale said no one gets in, one of them said, but his tone was apologetic. Mr. Hale doesn't give me orders anymore, Elena replied. We're divorced, remember? Open the door. They exchanged glances, then stepped aside. Some authority transcended official position. Elena had earned the right to enter through blood and survival. The basement had been converted into an interrogation room, concrete walls, a single chair bolted to the floor, and a man strapped to it who looked like he'd been through several kinds of hell. Blood dripped from his nose, his face was a mass of bruises, and one eye was swollen shut. Victor stood over him, sleeves rolled up, knuckles split and bloody. When he heard the door open, he turned, and the expression that crossed his face when he saw Elena was pure anguish. What are you doing out of bed? He crossed to her in 3 strides, hands hovering as if afraid to touch her. You should be resting, healing, not facing the consequences of my decisions, Elena interrupted. I convinced everyone to walk into that warehouse. Julian Rousseau died because of me. The least I can do is look our enemy in the face. Julian died because the Morettis are murderous bastards who've been planning this for 15 years, Victor said sharply. Don't you dare take responsibility for their choices. Then whose responsibility is it? Yours? Elena pushed past him, ignoring the way her legs trembled, and faced the man in the chair. You're Dominic Moretti. The man's one good eye focused on her with surprising clarity despite the beating he'd taken. When he spoke, his voice was rough but steady. And you're the infamous Elena Moreau, the wife Victor Hale loved enough to divorce. I wondered if you were real or just another lie, he told himself. What do you know about lies? Elena asked, pulling up a chair despite her father's protest. Sitting felt like relief and agony combined. You've been lying for 15 years pretending your family disbanded when really you were just waiting for the right moment to strike. Not lying, evolving. Dominic's split lips twisted into something like a smile. Your families destroyed us, scattered us to the winds, and expected us to just disappear, but we didn't disappear. We adapted. We learned patience, and we came back stronger than you ever imagined. Why wait so long? Elena pressed. Why 15 years? Because revenge served cold is revenge served right. Dominic's eye flickered to Victor. Your ex-husband, understands this. He's been asking me the same question for hours, in between breaking my ribs. Want to know what I told him? I want to know why Julian Rousseau had to die. Why 4 people who had nothing to do with what happened 15 years ago had to pay for your family's grudge. Because that's how war works, princess. Innocents die. Families suffer. The sins of the fathers get visited on their children. Dominic leaned forward as much as his restraints allowed. Your families taught us that lesson very well when you slaughtered my uncle and cousins. Some of them were children. Did you know that? Of course not. You were probably still playing with dolls while your precious syndicate was executing 10-year-olds for the crime of being born Moretti. Elena felt ice slide through her veins. She looked at her father, saw confirmation in his expression. This was the history they never spoke about, the dark foundation their world was built on. I didn't know, she said quietly. And that makes you innocent, not knowing? Dominic laughed, the sound wet and painful. You've been living in houses built on our blood, eating food bought with our stolen territory, sleeping peacefully while we had to rebuild from nothing. Your ignorance doesn't absolve you. He's right, Victor said, his voice flat. Everything we have, everything we are, it's built on violence. The Moretti family was destroyed because they challenged the existing power structure. We, our fathers, saw them as a threat and eliminated them, brutally, completely. Or so we thought. But you missed some, Elena said, understanding dawning. Children, distant relatives, people who were too young or too far removed to be immediate targets. We missed me, Dominic confirmed. I was 12. Sent away to boarding school in Europe. By the time I came home, my family was ash and memory. So I waited. I grew up. I found other survivors, cousins, uncles, people who'd escaped your purge, and together we planned. 15 years of planning, Victor said. Building resources, establishing networks, positioning people inside our organizations. The attacks, the intelligence leaks, the way you knew our every move. You've had people embedded in the families for years, haven't you? Years? Dominic agreed. Patient, loyal, waiting for my signal. You want to know the beautiful part? Some of them were right under your nose. Your security chief? Moretti cousin on his mother's side. One of the Rousseau accountants. Her sister married into my family. We've been everywhere, seen everything, and you never suspected. Elena's mind raced through implications. The Christmas Eve party. You knew we'd all be there because your people told you. The warehouse ambush. You knew our every move before we made it. Obviously, Dominic's smile was bloody and triumphant. You thought you were so clever, feeding us false information through compromised phones. We let you think you were outsmarting us while we prepared the real trap. The warehouse was never our headquarters. It was a killing floor, designed specifically to eliminate your leadership in one strike. Except we survived, Victor said coldly. Most of you, but not all. Dominic's eye found Elena again. You were supposed to die, you know. There was a specific order out on you, Victor's greatest weakness, the woman he loved enough to divorce to protect. My people were told to make sure you didn't leave that warehouse alive. Victor's hands clenched into fists, violence radiating from him in waves. But Elena spoke before he could. Then your people failed. I'm still here, and now I'm very interested in making sure your revenge ends with you. You think killing me stops this? Dominic laughed again, and this time Elena heard the edge of madness in it. I'm one piece of a much larger operation. You've been fighting me, but there are others. Other families you destroyed, other grudges nursing in the dark, other people waiting for the syndicate to show weakness. Give me names, Victor demanded. No. I can make you talk. You've been trying for 6 hours. How's that working out? Dominic's defiance was impressive, even broken and bleeding. You can kill me, Victor. I expect you to. But you can't kill what we started. The syndicate's days of unchallenged power are over. We proved that when we burned your house and nearly killed everyone you care about. Then you die for nothing, Elena said quietly. Your revenge, your 15 years of planning, it ends in this basement with no one knowing your name. History won't remember Dominic Moretti. You'll just be another corpse in a war that never ends. She saw something flicker in his eye, doubt maybe, or the first crack in his certainty. Before he could respond, Sofia Castellano appeared at the basement door. We've got a problem, she said urgently. Multiple black SUVs approaching the perimeter. At least 20 vehicles, professional formations. Someone found us. Victor swore viciously. How? We swept for tracking devices, dumped all our phones. Doesn't matter how, Robert cut in. What matters is they're here. We've got maybe 5 minutes before they breach the property. Elena's mind worked through the math. They were in a residential area, surrounded by civilians, with wounded that couldn't be moved quickly. A firefight here would be catastrophic. We can't fight them, she said, struggling to her feet despite the pain. Not here, not now. Too many innocents could get caught in crossfire. Then what? Sophia demanded. We surrender? Let them finish what they started at the warehouse? No. An idea formed in Elena's mind, desperate and dangerous, but possibly their only option. She looked at Dominic, saw him watching the panic with satisfaction, and made a decision. We give them what they came for. Elena, Victor started, but she cut him off. They came for leadership, for the heads of families, so we give them one. She turned to Dominic. How many people are in your organization? How many Moretti loyalists are out there still working your vendetta? Enough, he said, but uncertainty crept into his voice. Enough to keep fighting if you're dead? Or does this whole operation collapse without you? You're not going to kill me. I'm too valuable as a source of information. Wrong. Elena pulled the gun her father had given her, checked the magazine with hands that didn't shake. You're a liability. You've told us enough to know your organization exists, but not enough to dismantle it, which means you're useless except as a bargaining chip. So here's what's going to happen. We're going to walk you outside, hand you over to whoever's coming, and tell them this war is over." "They'll never accept that," Dominic said, but fear finally entered his expression. "They will if we give them your head on a platter, literally if necessary." Elena's voice was ice. "You wanted revenge for your family? Congratulations. You're about to die for them, just like your uncle did." "Elena, what are you doing?" Victor asked quietly. "Ending this, one way or another." She looked at him, saw understanding dawn. "They want blood for blood, life for life. We give them Dominic, the mastermind, the architect of this whole thing, and we demand a truce. If they refuse, if they keep fighting, they do it without their leader and with the knowledge that we're willing to execute prisoners." "That's a war crime," Robert protested. "This whole war is a crime." Elena kept her gun trained on Dominic. "The question is whether we want it to continue until we're all dead, or whether we end it now with a demonstration that both sides have lost enough." 2 minutes until the vehicles arrived. According to the security feed Sophia was monitoring on her phone. Not enough time for debate. Barely enough time for action. "Do it," Victor decided. "Get him up." They hauled Dominic out of the chair, dragged him up the stairs and toward the front entrance. Elena followed, her wounded side screaming protest with every step, but her gun hand steady. Behind her, she felt the weight of everyone's stares. Her father's concern, Sophia's calculation, Victor's complicated mixture of pride and terror. The black SUVs pulled up exactly as they reached the front yard. Doors opened and armed figures emerged, at least 30 of them, surrounding the property with professional precision. But they didn't fire, didn't advance. They waited. A woman stepped forward from the center vehicle, 50s, elegant despite tactical gear, with Dominic's bone structure and the same cold intelligence in her eyes. "Catherine Moretti," Victor said quietly. "Dominic's aunt. She's been operating their European division." "I want my nephew," Catherine called across the distance. "Alive and unharmed. And maybe we can discuss terms." Elena stepped forward, gun pressed against Dominic's temple. "You're not in a position to make demands. Your nephew orchestrated an attack that killed 4 people, destroyed property, and nearly assassinated multiple family heads. By every law in our world, his life is forfeit. And by every law in our world, your family's committed genocide against mine," Catherine countered. "So let's not pretend anyone has moral high ground here. Give me Dominic, walk away, and we'll call this round a draw." "No." Elena's voice carried across the yard with surprising strength. "This doesn't end in a draw. It ends with both sides stepping back from mutual destruction and acknowledging that revenge only breeds more revenge. Your nephew wanted blood for blood. Fine, we've all bled. Now we either stop or we keep going until there's no one left standing." Pretty speech from someone who wasn't even born when my family was slaughtered. "You're right, I wasn't there. I didn't make those choices, didn't pull those triggers, didn't give those orders. But I've lived my whole life in the world those choices created, a world of constant violence, of alliances built on fear, of children growing up learning to shoot before they learn to trust." Elena's voice caught slightly. "I'm done with that world. I'm done sacrificing people to grudges older than I am. So here's my offer. You take Dominic. You dismantle your revenge operation. You stop targeting the families. And in exchange, we don't come after you. We let the Moretti name rebuild in peace, no interference, no sabotage. A clean slate for both sides." "Why would you offer that?" Catherine asked, suspicion clear in her voice. "Because I'm tired," Elena said simply. "Tired of death, tired of war, tired of watching good people die for bad history. Because I almost died 2 days ago, and it made me realize that continuing this cycle isn't strength, it's insanity. And because someone needs to be brave enough to say enough." The silence stretched, tense and fragile. Elena could feel Victor beside her, ready to grab her and run if shooting started. Could feel her father's presence at her back, weapon drawn, prepared to die protecting her. Could feel the weight of this moment, the way history balanced on the knife's edge of her decision. Catherine Moretti studied her for a long moment, and Elena saw calculation happen behind those cold eyes. Finally, she nodded. "Release him." Elena lowered her weapon. Victor cut Dominic's restraints. The man stumbled forward, was caught by 2 of Catherine's soldiers. "Your nephew lives," Elena called. "Make sure this piece lives too. Because if it doesn't, if there's one more attack, one more assassination attempt, one more operation against the families, we won't offer mercy again. We'll come for all of you, and we won't stop until the Moretti name is truly extinct. That's not a threat. It's a promise. Catherine's smile was thin and cold. Understood. I'll be in touch to formalize the agreement. Until then, consider this a ceasefire. The Moretti forces withdrew as precisely as they'd arrived, black SUVs disappearing into the city. Elena watched them go, then felt her legs give out. Victor caught her before she hit the ground, his arms steady and sure. That was either the bravest or most insane thing I've ever seen, he murmured. Both, Elena managed. Definitely both. She let him carry her back inside. Let Dr. Chen fuss over her torn stitches and lecture about bed rest. Let her father hover with anxiety written all over his face. But inside, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Or at least the possibility of it. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of recovery and reconstruction. The families honored the ceasefire with the Morettis, both sides too exhausted and depleted to consider breaking it. Treaties were negotiated, territories redefined, agreements formalized in documents that would have seemed absurd to outsiders but meant everything to their world. Elena healed slowly, her body knitting itself back together with stubborn persistence. Dr. Chen declared her recovery miraculous, though he warned she'd carry the scar for life. Elena didn't mind. Some scars were worth keeping. Victor visited every day, bringing books she mentioned wanting to read, food from restaurants she liked, silence when she needed it, and conversation when she didn't. They didn't talk about the divorce, about their marriage, about anything weightier than whether her pain medication made her nauseous. But his presence was steady, patient, and utterly unlike the man who'd handed her those papers on Christmas Eve. 1 month after the warehouse, Elena was cleared to leave Dr. Chen's care. Her father wanted her to come home to the Moreau estate to rest and recover somewhere safe and familiar. But Elena had other plans. She showed up at Victor's new residence. He'd bought a brownstone in Manhattan after the estate burned. Something more modest, more defensible, more like a home than a fortress. The security recognized her immediately, waved her through without question. Victor answered the door himself, surprise and something warmer flickering across his face when he saw her. Elena, I didn't expect... Is everything okay? I need to talk to you, she interrupted. Can I come in? He stepped aside immediately, ushered her into a living room that was still mostly unpacked boxes and temporary furniture. They sat across from each other, and Elena was suddenly nervous in a way she hadn't been facing down armed Moretti soldiers. The divorce papers, she said finally. Are they filed yet? No. Victor's voice was rough. I never submitted them. I kept telling myself I would, that it was the right thing to do, but I couldn't. He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. I couldn't make it final. Good. Elena pulled an envelope from her purse, slid it across the coffee table. Because I need you to sign something else. Victor opened it, and she watched his expression shift from confusion to shock to something that looked like hope. Elena, these are marriage counseling intake forms. I know what they are. She met his eyes steadily. 4 years we were married, and we never talked. Never really trusted each other. Never figured out how to be partners instead of allies of convenience. The divorce taught me something, Victor. It taught me that I don't want to just survive a marriage. I want to build one. A real one, with honesty and trust and all the messy, difficult work that takes. You want to try again? I want to try for the first time, Elena corrected. Actually try. No more secrets, no more protecting each other from the truth, no more deciding what the other person can or can't handle. We start over, but we do it right this time. Victor stared at the forms like they might disappear if he looked away. I don't deserve this. After everything I did, probably not, Elena agreed. But I don't want what you deserve. I want what we could be if we actually worked for it. And I think you want that too, or you would have filed those papers a month ago. I've never done counseling, never talked to anyone about feelings or vulnerability or any of that. I know, it's going to be uncomfortable and difficult and probably terrible at first. But Victor? She reached across the table, took his hand. I love you. Somehow, despite everything, I still love you. And I think you love me too. So maybe it's worth being uncomfortable if it means we get to actually have what we both wanted all along. He turned her hand over in his, traced the scar on her palm from where she'd cut herself on broken glass escaping the warehouse. Scars recognizing scars. I do love you, he said quietly. I have since the beginning. I just didn't know how to show it in any way that wasn't controlling or distant or completely dysfunctional. Then learn, Elena smiled. We'll learn together. That's what the counseling is for. And if we can't figure it out, if we're too damaged, too broken, then at least we'll know we tried. Really tried, with everything we have. She squeezed his hand. But Victor, I think we can do this. I think under all the trauma and distance and dysfunction, there's something real worth fighting for, don't you? He looked at her for a long moment, and Elena saw the war happening behind his eyes, fear and hope, control and surrender, the safe distance he'd maintained for years versus the terrifying intimacy she was offering. Finally, he nodded. Yes, I think there is. Ink. He picked up the pen she'd brought. Where do I sign? They filled out the intake forms together, right there in his half-unpacked living room, starting the long process of building something real from the wreckage of what they'd had. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't a grand gesture or a passionate reunion. It was two broken people choosing to be broken together and hoping they could heal. But it was honest. And for them, that was revolutionary. 6 months later, Elena stood in the office that had once been Victor's study, now converted into her architecture studio. The walls were covered with blueprints and sketches, not of fortresses or estates, but of community centers and affordable housing, of spaces designed to shelter rather than intimidate. The Moretti ceasefire had held. Catherine had been true to her word, dismantling the revenge operations in exchange for the families leaving the surviving Morettis alone to rebuild. It wasn't perfect peace. Their world would never have that, but it was sustainable, and that was enough. The families themselves had changed in subtle ways. Marcus Russo had stepped back from leadership after Julian's death, letting his remaining sons take over with a mandate to operate more ethically. Sofia Castellano had finally pushed Antonio into retirement, modernizing their operations with surprising compassion. Even the Kowalski brother, Alexander the survivor, had shifted focus from enforcement to conflict resolution. And Elena had discovered that the skills she'd developed as a Mafia wife translated remarkably well to advocacy work. She understood power, understood negotiation, understood how to navigate complex social dynamics to get things done. She just never thought to apply those skills to anything beyond survival. Now she was designing the first community center in what had been Moretti territory, funded jointly by all the families as part of the peace agreement, a visible symbol that the war was over, that rebuilding was possible, that the children growing up in their world might have different options than guns and grudges. You're doing it again, Victor's voice came from the doorway. He'd learned to knock, to wait for permission, to respect her space in ways that would have been impossible before. Doing what? Looking at those plans like they're going to solve all the world's problems. Elena smiled. They won't, but they might solve a few small ones, which is better than solving none. He crossed to her, wrapped his arms around her from behind in a gesture that had become comfortable over months of counseling and conscious effort. She leaned into him, still marveling at how different this felt from their early marriage. Less performance, more presence. How was your session today? She asked. Victor had started individual therapy in addition to their couples counseling, working through trauma that went back decades. Hard, Doctor. Morrison wanted to talk about my father, about how I learned to equate control with love. He was quiet for a moment. I told her about the divorce, about how I thought pushing you away was protection, when really it was just repeating what he did to my mother. And she asked me if I wanted to be like him, or if I wanted to be better, so I'm trying to be better. Elena turned in his arms, looked up at him. 6 months of therapy hadn't fixed everything. They still fought, still struggled with communication, still had moments where old patterns resurfaced. But they were learning, growing, becoming people who could actually sustain a real marriage instead of a strategic alliance. I'm proud of you, she said simply. Yeah? His smile was tentative, hopeful in ways Victor Hale had never allowed himself to be. I'm proud of you too. This project, what you're building, it matters. It's not as impressive as running a criminal empire. It's more impressive. It's harder to build than to destroy, harder to heal than to hurt. You're doing the hard thing. He kissed her forehead. Besides, I'm not running an empire anymore. I'm running legitimate businesses and trying to figure out how to be a decent husband. That's plenty challenging. They stood like that for a while, wrapped in each other's arms in the space Elena had claimed for her own dreams and ambitions. Outside, the city hummed with life, dangerous and beautiful, broken and healing, exactly like them. Do you ever regret it? Victor asked quietly. Taking me back? Choosing to rebuild instead of walking away? Elena considered the question honestly. There had been moments, plenty of them, where the easy path would have been to cash the settlement check, move to the Hampton house, start over somewhere far from the violence and complexity of their world. Moments when therapy felt impossible, when old wounds reopened, when she wondered if they were just too damaged to ever be truly whole. But then there were other moments. Quiet mornings drinking coffee together, breakthroughs in therapy where they actually heard each other. The way Victor had shown up for her father when Robert had a health scare, no questions asked. The way she'd held him through nightmares about the warehouse, about losing her, about all the ways his control had failed. No, she said finally. I don't regret it. It's hard, and sometimes I hate how hard it is, but I don't regret choosing to try. Good. Because I'm pretty sure I'd fall apart without you at this point. You wouldn't fall apart. You'd just be miserable and emotionally constipated. He laughed, real and genuine, and so different from the controlled man she'd married. Fair point. Elena's phone buzzed with a text from her father. Dinner tonight? Catherine Moretti is in town and wants to discuss the community center funding. Thought you'd want to be there. She showed Victor the message. Want to come? Might be good to have unified family representation. A dinner with your father and the woman who tried to kill us 6 months ago? Sounds romantic. Our life is nothing if not interesting. They went together that evening dressed for negotiation, but armed only with briefcases and architectural plans. Catherine Moretti met them at an upscale restaurant in Midtown, looking elegant and dangerous in equal measure. She'd kept her word about the ceasefire, had even become something approaching an ally in the months since. Elena, Victor. She greeted them with continental kisses and calculating eyes. You both look well. Marriage suits you better the second time around. We're working on it, Elena said diplomatically. Over dinner, they discussed the community center, the funding structures, the ways to ensure the project actually served the neighborhood rather than just being a PR stunt for the families. Catherine was surprisingly engaged, offering insights about what the Moretti territory actually needed. You know what's interesting? Catherine said over dessert. 15 years we spent planning revenge, building resources, positioning people, preparing for war. And in the end, what stopped us wasn't force. It was one woman with the courage to say enough. And the leverage of having your nephew at gunpoint, Victor added dryly. Well, yes, that helped. Catherine's smile was sharp. But the point stands. You changed the conversation, Elena. Instead of who could hurt whom worse, you asked who was tired of hurting. Turned out, we all were. Are you saying peace is more satisfying than revenge? Elena asked. I'm saying revenge is exhausting. Peace at least lets you sleep at night. Catherine raised her wine glass. To uncomfortable truces and the brave fools who broker them. They toasted, 3 former enemies sharing a table and building something that might actually last. It wasn't friendship. Their history was too bloody for that. But it was cooperation, which in their world was revolutionary enough. Later that night, Elena and Victor walked home through the city streets, security following at a discreet distance. The June air was warm, the sidewalks crowded with people living normal lives, blissfully unaware of the criminal underworld operating in their midst. Do you think it'll last? Elena asked. The peace with the Morettis, the changes in the families, all of it? Honestly, I don't know. Victor took her hand, laced their fingers together. Our world doesn't have a great track record with lasting peace, but for the first time in my life, I actually want it to last more than I want to control it. That feels like progress. It is progress, for both of us. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, and Elena found herself thinking about the woman she'd been 6 months ago, the one who'd signed divorce papers on Christmas Eve, who'd thought her life was ending when really it was just beginning. So much had changed, so much had been destroyed and rebuilt. She wouldn't go back to who she'd been for anything. "I have something to tell you," Elena said as they neared the brownstone. "I wasn't sure when to bring it up, but you're pregnant." She stopped walking, stared at him. "How did you—" "You've been nauseous in the mornings, you turned down wine at dinner, and you've had that slightly terrified look all week." Victor's smile was gentle. "I've been waiting for you to tell me. And how do you feel about it?" He pulled her close, and Elena could feel his heart racing against her cheek. Terrified, excited, completely unprepared but willing to try anyway. "How do you feel?" "All of that, plus wondering if we're ready for this. If we're stable enough, healed enough." "We're not," Victor interrupted. "We're still in therapy, still working through our issues, still figuring out how to be married. But Elena, I don't think anyone's ever truly ready for a child. We just do our best and hope it's enough." "Your best used to involve emotional distance and control. And your best used to involve suffering in silence and pretending everything was fine. We've both changed. We're still changing." He pulled back to look at her. "We can do this. Together. Imperfectly, but honestly. Isn't that what we've been learning?" Elena thought about the counseling sessions, the hard conversations, the way they'd slowly built trust from the rubble of their first attempt at marriage. Thought about the community center she was designing, the peace she'd helped broker, the woman she'd become through surviving violence and choosing forgiveness. "Yes," she said, "that's exactly what we've been learning." They told her father over breakfast the next morning. Robert cried. Actual tears, which Elena had seen maybe 3 times in her entire life. He hugged them both fiercely, then immediately started planning security protocols for his future grandchild, because some things never changed. The families sent gifts when word spread, tasteful, expensive, designed to curry favor with the next generation. Elena donated most of them to the community center, keeping only the practical items and the gifts that came with genuine warmth rather than political calculation. 7 months later, on a snowy January afternoon, Elena went into labor. Victor was beside himself with panic, all his tactical training useless in the face of her contractions. Her father was worse, pacing the hospital waiting room like a caged animal. Even Sophia showed up, bringing practical advice and surprising compassion. The birth was complicated. Elena's scar tissue from the gunshot wound made everything harder. But after 12 hours of labor, their daughter entered the world screaming, healthy and perfect in theirs. "What do we name her?" Victor asked, cradling the tiny bundle like she might break. Elena looked at their daughter, dark hair, Victor's nose, lungs that suggested she'd have no trouble making her opinions known. "Hope," she said. "We name her Hope." That's not very traditional for our world. Good. Nothing about us is traditional. Elena reached for the baby, felt the solid weight of new life in her arms. She's proof that we can break cycles, that we can choose different paths, that we can be better than what came before. That sounds like hope to me. Victor kissed her forehead, then their daughter's. "Hope Hale. I like it." "Hope Moreau Hale," Elena corrected. Hyphenated. Because she's both of us, not just one or the other. Fair enough. But they sat together in the hospital room as evening fell, their daughter sleeping between them, and Elena felt a peace she'd never known was possible. Their life wouldn't be normal. They'd still navigate a world of violence and politics, still deal with the complications of their criminal connections. But they'd do it together, honestly, with a child who might grow up knowing better than they had. That night, after Victor had reluctantly gone home to sleep and Hope was in the nursery, Elena's father sat with her. "Your mother would be so proud," Robert said quietly. "Not just of the baby, but of you, of who you've become. Mama wanted me to be a perfect Mafia wife who kept her mouth shut and played her role. Your mother wanted you to be safe and happy. She just thought those things required fitting in, not standing out." Robert smiled. "She was wrong. You've proven that standing out, fighting back, demanding more, that's what keeps you safe. That's what makes you happy. I don't know about happy, satisfied maybe, content with my choices. That's better than happy. Happy is temporary. Satisfaction lasts. Elena thought about the year she'd had: divorce, violence, near death, reconciliation, pregnancy, peace. A year that had torn her apart and rebuilt her into something stronger. She thought about the woman who'd signed those papers on Christmas Eve, who'd thought her life was ending. That woman would never have believed this was possible. But it was. All of it. The hard, messy, imperfect reality of choosing to fight for what mattered instead of accepting what was easy. "Papa?" Elena said as he stood to leave. "Thank you for raising me to be strong enough for this, for teaching me to shoot, to think, to fight when it mattered. You did the hard part yourself, sweetheart. I just gave you the tools." He kissed her forehead. "Get some rest. Tomorrow you start the hardest job in the world, being a parent in our world while trying to make it better. No pressure. You've survived worse." After he left, Elena lay in the hospital bed and thought about the future. About raising hope to be strong but not cruel, powerful but not controlling, aware of the darkness in their world but not consumed by it. About building something better, not just for her daughter, but for all the children growing up in the shadows of their family's violence. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever was. But Elena Moreau-Hale had never been afraid of hard work. She just needed to find work worth doing, and now, holding her daughter's future in her hands, she finally had. The story that began with divorce papers on Christmas Eve ended with a baby sleeping peacefully in a hospital nursery, with a marriage rebuilt on truth instead of lies, with peace brokered through courage instead of violence. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. Their world didn't do fairy tales, but it was real and honest, and theirs. And for Elena, that was more than enough. It was everything.